An alien race from the depths of space colonizes Earth. Millions of people from around the world are sent to work in mines on other planets. Those left on Earth are controlled with implanted tracking chips and giant alien robots positioned around the perimeters of cities. Oh wow, you hear me? Ah! Chicago, 2019. The city is under martial law due to a massive alien attack on all major cities of the world. The Drummond family, a father, a mother, and their 2 sons, tries to leave the city, but all exits are blocked. When a police officer stops their car at one of the exits, the father presses the gas pedal and breaks through the blockade. Entering an exit tunnel, the man is forced to stop as the exit is blocked by aliens. Taken by surprise, the father freezes, although his wife asks him to turn around. Suddenly, an unknown pulse tears through both adults sitting in the front seats. The children, looking up, see an incomprehensible creature standing right in front of their car's hood. 9 years later, the world, having surrendered without a fight to the invaders, is completely under their control. The operation of vital productions, including power plants, has been restored everywhere. The aliens are called legislators because all laws and rules now come from them. Over the years since Earth's surrender, the aliens have forced humans to build suitable living spaces for them underground, called closed zones, where only high-ranking human officials are allowed entry. It became clear that the alien invasion aimed at Earth's resources, their extraction, and exportation led to huge social stratification. The rich, working for the aliens, continue to live well, while the poor have lost all guarantees, including education and healthcare. Police lawlessness thrives, and the deportation of all undesirable people from the planet has begun. The alien systems block all communication lines, so people know nothing about the life of other cities and countries. Amidst this wave, a resistance emerged, planning an attack on the closed zone in Chicago. But the plan failed, the zone was unharmed, and the fate of the rebels remains unknown, although the police assure that they were all eliminated. And this was supposed to be the first spark from which a flame would ignite. 9 years after the failed uprising in Chicago, the police monitor anyone who raises even the slightest suspicion. Detective William Mulligan reviews video recordings from Gabriel's apartment, whose brother Rafe died in the uprising and was posthumously named a hero of the resistance. The guy goes through his usual morning routines, then wakes up his girlfriend, showing her a photo taken on the other side of the lake, where visiting is now prohibited. But the girl does not want to believe in a change in their lives and asks not to invent the impossible. Gabe leaves the house where his friend, who has obtained and repaired a boat, is already waiting for him, so they can sail out of the city tonight. But Gabe reminds him that he is under round-the-clock surveillance. Meanwhile, Mulligan reviews the newspapers and sees an advertisement for the Phoenix fire suppression system, after which he goes to his old friend Jane, who now runs a brothel. At the entrance, he sees the Phoenix emblem on the wall and notices the police chief. The owner greets Mulligan as a good friend and hands him a gift box, mentioning the Donnans and their gifts. Returning to the police station, he shares his findings. Phoenix exists and is preparing something for the New World Masters, but his partner does not believe that anyone could have survived the last purge. At this time in the subway, 2 resistance members meet because the newspaper advertisement is a battle readiness order given by their leader, whom they call First. He has learned that there is an entrance to the zone through the stadium, and soon there will be a Unity Festival, which high-ranking aliens will attend. The only thing left is to infiltrate. The next day, Gabe goes to work, having passed through the recognition system, since every person now has an identifier chip inside. The guy works in a data restoration center where he views millions of private videos a day and checks browser history requests. He sends all the collected information to the Central Information Center and destroys the carriers. Later, he receives a cigarette containing an unknown substance from his colleague and hides it behind his ear. After work, Gabe exits to the outside with a crowd of other workers and sees arriving guards grab and lead away one of the women. At the same time, an alien transport ship is sending off another batch of people as slaves for the alien mines from Earth. And around the perimeter of the city stand giant alien robots to prevent people from escaping. Gabe goes to the boat but is horrified at the sight of the weapon in his friend's hands. If they get caught, they will be instantly destroyed. Their scuffle is interrupted by the appearance of Mulligan, who orders Gabe to get into his car. He reminds the boy that he was his father's partner and now asks not to repeat his brother's mistakes and make the right choice. Gabriel has no information about Phoenix, and he does not intend to snitch, so the conversation goes nowhere. Gabriel goes to the person he is supposed to sell the acquired cigarette to, but the potential client pushes the boy into his van and, putting on them special collars that jam the tracking chip signal, drives him to the center of a destroyed district, where in one of the surviving buildings, Gabe meets his living brother. After a joyful reunion, Rafe tells him that he is the only survivor from his group. Unknown to him, Craftsman removed his chip, and now he has joined a new group. He takes the cigarette and, giving his brother a large sum of money, orders him to leave the area because Phoenix plans to attack the invaders. The brothers argue about the necessity of the uprising, but Rafe is sure that as long as there is time to fight, they should fight. Gabriel then rushes into his apartment and hurriedly starts packing, convincing his girlfriend to join him. The girl tries to persuade the boy to stay, and seeing the money and learning that Rafe is alive, asks the boy to think carefully, as they could then be recorded as accomplices. The couple argues, unaware that the police are closely listening to their conversation. Gabe leaves alone, but immediately encounters Mulligan, who was following him. Gabriel runs away from Mulligan and hides in the secret passages underground. He puts on the remaining collar, and the aliens' drones do not lose sight of him. Mulligan returns to the station, where he has an entire room dedicated to Phoenix, and notes that Rafe might be alive. At this time, Rafe's carrier pigeon reaches the recipient, and the information is passed along the chain to a secret IP center, where upon entering the received numbers, its worker displays Phoenix's target, an official who will gain access to the closed zone that day. The newspapers immediately publish Phoenix's announcement, and the group members receive the call. One of them, working on the radio, plays a conditional track heard by a man with a dog, who immediately takes her for a walk. Her bark is heard by a mechanic girl who rushes to her car. Later they arrive at an underground clinic where a doctor performs complex operations to remove the tracking chips. Then, he hands over the chips extracted from law-abiding citizens previously deceased from diseases, as well as special containers that need to be kept in the mouth, so they too will be recognized as law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, one of the resistance members, serving as a priest, meets with Rafe. The pair goes to an arms dealer and receives invisible explosive material from a girl extracted from a crashed alien ship. If attached to an organic carrier's skin or hair, scanners will not be able to detect it. Later, the resistance group gathers together. The leader distributes containers with new chips and shows a photo of the person who will go to the aliens. Lastly, he hands out poison capsules to everyone, which will help avoid being captured alive by the enemy. The group freely enters the festival and attaches the invisible alien explosive device to an official. He goes to the arriving aliens and explodes with them. The city is immediately locked down, and the police block the streets to find the attackers. The priest is the first to die, caught in gunfire. Rafe is caught by one of the aliens and tries to escape from it, hiding in a van. This is seen by the guy's comrades, who come to his rescue and destroy the alien. The surviving rebels try to escape from the city, while the aliens bring in hunter warriors from another world, and they quickly track down Rafe and his accomplices. Enraged, the legislators prepare to destroy the district where, according to their information, the resistance is based. Mulligan tries to persuade the police chief, who is heading to report to the aliens, not to allow this because he needs time to catch the suspects. But he is reminded that the decision is made and his search interests no one. Raids begin in the city, during one of which Gabe is captured, while his brother and two of his comrades reach the station and board buses 2 minutes before the expiration of the chips from law-abiding citizens. But when it seems they have managed to escape, the buses are stopped by the hunters. Realizing his capture is inevitable, one of the group takes the poison capsule. The mechanic girl attacks a hunter and is instantly vaporized. Rafe tries to run but is captured and brought to the police, where his brother is being interrogated at the same time. Mulligan shows him how Rafe is tortured to make him talk about Phoenix and give up first. Gabe learns that the city is preparing for destruction and agrees to send a message to the leader. He is brought to the surviving members of the resistance, and hearing that the guy allegedly knows ways into the zone, they agree to connect him with first. Gabe is brought to Jane Doe, who is number 1 and the leader of the resistance in the city. Upon seeing the boy, the woman calls him by name, which confuses Gabrielle, and at that moment, a police squad raids the brothel and kills Jane. The investigation reveals that Jane had installed listening devices to record conversations with police officers she served to gather secret information. Later, during a briefing with the aliens, Mulligan names the members of Phoenix who, learning about the death of First, voluntarily left this life. Before the invasion, Jane was a history teacher and changed her profession to gather secret information. Mulligan presents recordings obtained in the brothel, where it is heard that the police chief actively leaked secret information about the aliens. Captured resistance members are deported to alien mines, and Mulligan, having declared the neutralization of the Chicago threat, is appointed acting commissioner. Later, he meets with Gabe and puzzles the boy with a new thought. What if the failure of the uprising was planned? And he hands the boy a memory card, extracted from a phone once given to him by Jane. The next day, Gabe views its contents, a video dedicated to a party before his birth, where close family friends record messages for him. There, he sees both Mulligan and Jane Doe, who was acquainted with his mother, as well as some other members of Phoenix. Meanwhile, Mulligan is allowed to arrive at the Earth Control Center and meet with the legislators in their habitat. As he heads to the spaceship, the same invisible substance that was part of the explosive used in the stadium attack manifests on him, explaining that Mulligan is also part of the resistance, and the plan was organized so that he could infiltrate the main alien base and set off an explosion. During the credits, a map shows that the plan worked, and the city blockades were successfully lifted, after which many resistance foci flared up everywhere. This means that the plan to light a match and ignite a bonfire was a success, and humanity begins an active fight against the alien oppressors. Despite the film being labeled as science fiction, the message here is quite realistic. How will humanity behave when it realizes the possibility of its total occupation? Also, the filmmakers draw belief in victory from the history of humanity, using Lenin's motto, "A spark will kindle a flame." The struggle, the underground conspiracy. The film is full of revolutionary stylistics, and it watches like a real political thriller. Japan 2023. People board a train and head to work. Everyone is busy with their own things, scrolling through Instagram feeds, making acquaintances on social networks, and discussing plans for the evening, unaware that in just a few minutes, their lives will change forever. Suddenly, the train's speed increases, and strange things start happening. A bottle cap rolling on the floor of the carriage suddenly disappears. Passengers begin receiving alerts about powerful earthquakes on their phones. Then the train enters a gloomy tunnel and comes to a sudden halt. People regain consciousness, bewildered by what has happened. One of the passengers opens the entrance doors, and people, screaming and pushing each other, rush to the exit, jumping from the high steps. But once outside, they can't believe their eyes. Traces of the civilized world are gone, and they are surrounded by the remnants of a destroyed city overgrown with trees and grass. Moreover, all the carriages have disappeared without a trace, except for the fifth one they were in. As time passes, the passengers begin to get acquainted. One of the guys, Shirahama, a firefighter, examines the injured and suggests checking the tunnel behind the carriage. He is joined by a girl named Katana and a guy named Hayashima, who also wants to understand what happened. Meanwhile, the police in the city cannot figure out where the last two carriages have gone, while the rest of the train, along with the passengers, remains undamaged. The three volunteers enter the tunnel and walk through the dark underworld for a long time. Suddenly, they notice a light ahead and hurry towards it, but when they emerge outside, they are astonished. There is nothing around that would remind them of the year 2023 with skyscrapers and technology, just a vast, lifeless desert. Shocked, the trio returns to their fellow misfortune mates. Initially, people do not believe their report, but after Hayashima shows a video recording of the surroundings, they are forced to accept the new reality. After 7 hours, people languish in anticipation of rescuers, when one of the girls, Reni, secretly looks into Hayashima's bag and finds a letter marked with the criminal department's seals, leading her to suspect that the guy's a criminal. Then Reni snatches food from Katana's bag, but, thinking she was seen, discards the package. Hayashima picks it up and carries it to the train, just as Katana discovers the theft. Seeing it in the guy's hands, the passengers accuse him of theft. Moreover, Reni reports about the letter from the colony. Offended, Hayashima denies the accusations and announces his departure. At this time, Shirahama pulls out a box of fruits and offers to share them. While Katana is distributing the food, one of the guys reviews the video he made earlier, clearly showing Reni stealing the food. Realizing that Hayashima is innocent, Shirahama and Katana run after him, managing to save the guy who nearly falls into a deep ditch. In gratitude, he confesses that he works as a hairdresser and is already 30 years old. But he refuses to explain the origin of the letter from the colony. Night falls. Passengers somehow settle down to sleep, but many cannot sleep, worrying about their future. In the morning, people begin to realize that they may never return home. Shirahama tries to gather the scattering people, but a friend asks the guide not to take responsibility for others' lives. Then the firefighter confesses that because of him, his colleague was injured, losing the ability to walk. Now he believes he must help everyone he can. Together, they catch up with those who left and persuade them to return to the carriage to solve problems collectively. Seeing this, Hayashima remembers his brother who was in prison, and the letter in his bag was from him. Fate had it that he had to take on the upbringing of his younger brother, and he still feels guilty for his older brother becoming a criminal. Meanwhile, a couple of passengers explore the surrounding area and find the ruins of a high tower. This is particularly strange because the news reported its construction, which was supposed to be completed in 2026. And one of the passengers found a can in the forest dated that year. A biologist among them encountered a plant whose genetic modification takes 30 years. It turns out that they are in the distant future of Earth, and it's far from a joyful discovery. At the same time in 2023, all channels are broadcasting messages about the disappearance of 2 carriages, which had at least 100 passengers. Night approaches and many fall into despair, while Katana and Shirahama place plastic containers on the roof of the carriage, hoping for rain. In the morning, the biologist draws the others' attention to the dense greenery, which means there must be a body of water nearby. A group of youth sets out to explore the forest. Along the way, Hayashima confesses that his parents are criminals, and then the guy spots a frog. This means water is very close, but ahead are impassable cliffs, which can only be climbed with the help of ropes. The group returns to the train and cutting wires heads back to the cliffs. Shirahama climbs to the top and joyfully shouts upon seeing a waterfall, but looking around he is horrified. Instead of Mount Fuji, a sea stretches out before him. Returning, he tells the others about this, and people start to speculate what happened to their planet. At night, everyone goes to sleep, but the eldest passenger, Tanaka, goes outside and sees an unfamiliar person. But when he tells about it, no one believes him. Then it starts to rain, helping people to collect water and even bathe. Meanwhile, the biologist continues to study the surrounding fauna, finds several edible plants, and shows them to the others. And still, Katana manages to eat a poisonous berry, but fortunately, her poisoning is not fatal. The news that the girl has recovered has a sobering effect on the passengers. They finally realize that sitting still, they won't survive. People get to work and even make utensils from bamboo. Bank cards turn out to be decent knives. The group of youths brings water from the waterfall, and they prepare a soup from plants. But after dinner, some feel sick and the biologist discovers a couple of poisonous berries in the common pot. Someone remembers seeing Tanaka near the pot, who is not among them. Shirahama sets out to look for him, but stumbles, falls, and loses his torch. After a while, Shirahama returns without Tanaka, but with Hayashima's previously lost barber tools, which he had sorely missed. In the morning, the biologist announces to the people that he is going to look for a river, which should be nearby. His friends go with him. But in the forest, they encounter a stranger who injures the biologist and runs away. The guys carry him back to the train, where fortunately there is a medical student who provides the injured with first aid. The others help as much as they can and pray for the guy. Later, Tanaka unexpectedly returns from the forest. It turns out he worked for a security company and can show how to make traps around the camp. Reni asks Hayashima to fix her hair, and soon there's a queue for the guy. Meanwhile, Shirahama and Katana notice a teenager caught in one of the traps, but the youngster gets out on his own and runs away. The friends hurry after him and soon find themselves by the river, but the boy asks them to wait for him at the spot and disappears into the forest. Hayashima, noticing their disappearance, catches up with the pair. At this time, the teenager returns and leads the friends to carriage number 6, which mysteriously ended up several kilometers away from the 5th carriage. The passengers from the 5th carriage are welcomed by the leader of the group from the 6th carriage, Yumamoto. Their carriage was lucky to be near the river, where there was plenty of fresh water and fish. Moreover, among them was a builder who, under his guidance, they were able to quickly set up a camp and even build a kitchen and a toilet. The newcomers find the one who injured their biologist. He confesses that he did it out of fear, thinking they were going to attack him. He bows deeply, apologizing for his action. And Yumamoto admits that he believes a return to the past is possible. The man told them that in the early days, they found a small boat on the river, where he managed to fix the radio and catch a signal, apparently from Canada, where the year 2060 was mentioned. From what he heard, the man understood that in 2026 a disaster occurred. A huge asteroid fell to Earth, causing powerful earthquakes and tsunamis worldwide, instantly taking billions of lives. The dust thrown into the atmosphere blocked sunlight, leading to the extinction of the remaining species. But the main thing is that the asteroid didn't fall by chance. It was space debris, as besides state corporations, satellites began to be launched by anyone who fancied. One of the probes collided with a satellite, which in turn fell onto an asteroid, leading to a deviation of its orbit. So it was a man-made disaster. That's why it's so important to return to their year and change the future. Inspired by the example of the sixth carriage, the passengers decided to make a bath by the river. Meanwhile, Tanaka continues to deteriorate, making himself a doll from branches and talking to it. In the morning, the bath is ready. For the first time in many days, people bathe in hot water and wash their clothes. And the guys find a strange stone on the riverbank, which Yumamoto learns about. He sends his people to find it, but Rennie notices strangers, and one of the guys lets slip that according to their leader, this stone might help them return home. The girls argue about the need to return, and Rennie pushes Katana away. She falls and accidentally shifts a layer of soil under which a dead body is discovered. Meanwhile, Tanaka reads in a newspaper an announcement about the search for a murderer in his description. At that time, Rennie and Katana are attacked by guys from the sixth carriage, but Rennie breaks free and runs to her own, where she tells about the found corpse, while Katana escapes from the guys through the forest. The fifth carriage decides to make weapons, while Shirahama and Hayashima run to the neighbors. But the girl is not there, and Katana meanwhile makes it to the boat. Yumamoto is forced to confess to the guys that he killed one of the passengers, who suddenly became aggressive and started attacking people with a knife. That's why he was recognized as a leader. The guys go home, hoping that Katana has returned, but she's not there, and the rest urge to go to the sixth carriage and punish the guilty. And the guys go again to look for the girl. Katana hides in the boat when Yumamoto comes in. He pretends to be calling an unknown station, but the girl sees that the wires are cut. The man discovers her and confesses that he doesn't want to return to the past because he intends to create a new society here. After that, he ties up Katana and locks her in the cabin, where her screams cannot be heard. In the morning, the passengers of the fifth carriage are just about to attack the neighbors when one of the women suggests backing up and looking for a building where they could hide. At this time, guys from the sixth carriage go to the neighbors to scavenge something, but they fall into traps. A fight starts when the rest of the sixth carriage's passengers arrive, and there are more men among them. The fight escalates into a real battle, which is stopped by the appearance of the escaped Katana, who accuses Yumamoto of lying. He is forced to admit to the deception, but he just wanted to keep people's spirits up. However, the passengers decide to exile the former leader. Before leaving, the man hands over a journal from the ship, which contains information about the tower that could help them return to the past. Meanwhile, those who went to search for the building reach the tower and find glowing asteroid fragments there. And in 2023, scientist Ray, after reviewing the video surveillance camera recordings, discovers that a wormhole appeared in the tunnel at the moment of the disappearance of two carriages, which apparently was the result of a distortion in the space-time continuum. The passengers study the journal found by Yumamoto and learn the exact date of the disaster. Moreover, they have an asteroid fragment that possesses a phenomenal magnetic charge. One of the passengers remembers how on the day of their departure, he saw something in the sky resembling a falling star. In the past, Ray, analyzing the same event, concludes that it was the flare from a supernova explosion. In the future, there's also an expert who explains that supernovas occur in space when a star reaches the end of its life cycle and explodes, releasing a massive amount of energy. Apparently, this created the temporal rift into which both carriages fell. It means they need to open this wormhole again. In the evening, a strong storm begins, forcing people to seek more reliable shelter than the carriage. Tanaka opens the rear doors leading into the tunnel. Unexpectedly, a strong gust snatches his doll and sucks it into the wormhole caused by the hurricane. But as soon as the storm subsides, the wormhole disappears. And in 2023, scientists find Tanaka's doll. Passengers in the future conclude that to summon the wormhole, they need a powerful energy source, for which they start looking for remnants of power lines. Digging up each post, the passengers find an electrical substation where somehow working equipment is preserved. They redirect enough electricity into the tunnel to stabilize the wormhole with the onset of the next storm, enough to return to the past. The storm starts at night, supported by the power of the substation. The wormhole opens, and everyone enters the carriage except Tanaka, who refused to return. The carriage is swallowed by the hole and races somewhere in space and time until its doors are opened by security service employees who say they have arrived on May 1, 2026, which means there are only a few months left before the asteroid falls. After going through quarantine procedures, the passengers tell the officials, presenting as evidence fragments of the meteorite and unusual plants from the future. Only the officials don't believe the stories about the upcoming apocalypse. Later, the internet buzzes about the incident. The time travelers find fans, which helps maintain interest in the traveler's story about the upcoming end of the world. Meanwhile, scientist Ray becomes convinced that the travelers are telling the truth, as he has also tracked the asteroid. One of the passengers posts an appeal on the internet telling ordinary people about the impending danger, and a passenger who held a high position in the government before the trip makes her way to the Minister of Defense. She listens to her former colleague and reports that the government believed them and is already preparing to launch a missile capable of altering the asteroid's trajectory to pass by Earth. Time passes, and the day of the catastrophe is about to dawn. The travelers decide to gather together on the platform to find out whether it was possible to avert the disaster, and if not, to perish together. But the military successfully completes their task and changes the meteorite's trajectory, saving humanity from total extinction. Quite an unusual series where various theories about the impending doom of humanity are mixed. And the finale of the story is very relevant, emphasizing that life on Earth is the result of the actions of each living being. And the future of the planet is a collective human responsibility. In the Middle East, a man appears who calls himself the Messiah and gathers crowds of believers in the new Advent. Is he sent by God, or is he a dangerous fraud seeking to disrupt the world's geopolitical order? The story is told through the eyes of people from vastly different backgrounds surrounding the enigmatic man. For 85 days, enemies have besieged Damascus, where a humanitarian catastrophe is growing. There is no food or water, and many people are dying in the shelling. And one day, two teenagers, Jabril and Samir, who have lost their families, see a man in yellow clothes on the street, urging people not to worry about the city's fall because God has predetermined that it will not happen. Salvation in the form of a sandstorm is approaching, and people run under the onslaught of the elements while the preacher does not leave and repeats that salvation is already close. The sandstorm breaks the supply chains of the enemy troops, and they retreat, and the city is saved. FBI agent Eva Geller watches the broadcast of everything that happened, paying attention to the strange man whom people call Al-Masih, and learns that he is leading hundreds of his followers into the desert. At night, the men talk about faith and religion around the fire. Al-Masih asks questions and is strict with those who do not want to think about his questions. Now all of humanity is on the brink, and for people to survive, they must cling to him. After this conversation, the man walks away from the people and stands for a long time looking at the sky, giving the impression that he's talking to God. The teenagers who came with him from Damascus remember how he preached while they hid in the basement, and suddenly Al-Masih calls one of them, Jabril, and tells him that each soul has its own star. He saw light in the boy, and soon Allah will lay a mission on him. Meanwhile, Eva is trying to find out which officers know something about the new Messiah and begins gathering information. Soon she learns that after walking 65 kilometers through the sands, the people reached the borders of Israel and stopped at the fence. Half of the followers believe that Al-Masih has led them to flight, but he orders them to gather all their weapons and bury them. He himself passes through the barbed wire fence, where he is arrested by Israel's border service. An agent from Israel's internal security agency, Aviram Dahan, is called in to interrogate him. However, the detained man refuses to reveal his real name, calling himself a messenger, and impresses the agent by calling him by name and revealing unexpected details from the agent's life that no one except the agent himself could know. Aviram is particularly touched by the incident with the boy that the Messiah reminds him of. Dahan completes the interrogation and leaves the room, destroying the video recording of the interrogation. He then goes to his partner to find out if he has told anyone about what happened in the desert, but his partner remains silent about it. As Aviram gets into his car, he suddenly sees a man with a bag over his head on the back seat, but realizes that it is a flashback to a tragedy from long ago. Early in the morning, the agent returns to work and is surprised to discover that Al-Masih has escaped from custody. Meanwhile, in the small American town of Dili, local preacher Felix Aguero greets his congregation, while the FBI decides to assist Israeli authorities in finding Al-Masih and discovering who he really is. This is why Eva Geller flies to Israel, and her insistence, Aviram is summoned to the office, but he cannot explain why he deleted the video recording. He behaves provocatively, not understanding why he should be accountable to the American woman. Meanwhile, an international conflict is brewing in the world as people who were led by the Messiah to the border of Israel are starving. Even after hearing about his escape, they decide to stay because they believe in his return. One day, volunteers bring food and water, and the Messiah's followers notice that the police are looking for someone in the crowd. They realize that Al-Masih has escaped, which causes unprecedented rejoicing. At the same time, Al-Masih delivers a sermon on the Temple Mount, using apocalyptic phrases about the end of history and calling on those who are willing to go to God's judgment to step forward. A young boy comes forward, but the sermon is interrupted by the Israeli police who try to arrest the Messiah. The operation fails due to a shot that hits the child who has come out. The people start screaming, driving away the invaders. But then Al-Masih lays his hands on the boy, who then stands up unharmed, showing the bloody bullet to the public. The people consider this a miracle while Al-Masih disappears into the crowd. Eva hears the news on the radio and asks to be taken to the scene of the incident. Meanwhile, Muslims also discuss the Messiah's sermon and are quite unhappy with his interpretation of Allah's teachings. The people in the camp cannot understand why their newly found Jesus has abandoned them. And Eva notices the surveillance, and her pursuer turns out to be Aviram, who wants to know why she's meddling in something that's not her business. But Eva is not going to back down. She studies the recordings from the CCTV cameras and notices the strange disappearance of the Messiah. And it's still unclear who fired the shot. She tries to find the injured boy while in Jerusalem the electricity is shut off to quell the unrest. The agents arrive at the boy's address, but it turns out that his family has left, scared of the crowd's interest. Reports of the incident on the Temple Mount are being shown around the world, and one of them is seen by Father Felix while his daughter Rebecca dreams of running away from home. Meanwhile, Jabril sees a flickering light at the fence and goes there, while Eva finds Al-Masih in a photo from Jordan. Palestinian girls bring food for the hungry and promise to help people. Jabril goes to get assistance when a man who appears hits him on the head and takes him away from the fence. That same night, the pastor's daughter Rebecca runs away from home, while her disillusioned father decides to burn down his church. The man takes a canister of gasoline and a lighter and heads towards the building. At that moment, a message about an approaching tornado comes to his phone, which was left at home, and the pastor's wife goes to find him. Sirens begin to sound in the town, and the residents hurry to the only shelter, the church, as the tornado begins its deadly circle. Father Felix calls his daughter, hoping she's nearby, and suddenly sees the motionless figure of Al-Masih nearby. Later on, a video of Rebecca's rescue appears in social media, which is intercepted by CIA agents and blocked from spreading. But how did the Messiah end up in America? Soon, federal agent Will arrives at the scene. The man is shaken by the sight of the completely destroyed town, where only one building, the church, survived, and where Al-Masih is currently located, explaining to the astonished priest that he came here by God's will. Felix is shaken because he was planning to burn down the building that ended up saving everyone's lives. At that moment, Agent Will enters and arrests the Messiah. The priest swears to get Al-Masih out of jail, while Aviram interrogates Jabril in the hopes of finding out the Messiah's whereabouts. But the boy does not know. The agent wants to understand why people follow the men unknown to anyone and promises to prove that there is no God. Meanwhile, Felix turns to a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union for help because everything that happened was not a mere coincidence. And Eva arrives in Texas to question Al-Masih, but his lawyer manages to obtain a ban on the meeting. The situation worsens when one of the videos about what happened in the town circumvents their social media block and reaches the mass media. Al-Masih's lawyer tells him that while the charge of illegal entry into the United States is likely to be upheld in court, she can get him out of the federal immigration detention center where he's being held. When the lawyer leaves the detention center, Agent Will informs Eva of this and she rushes to see him. However, during their conversation, Al-Masih turns the situation around in his favor again by showing that he knows her name and sympathizes with her losses, as her mother and husband have passed away. He realizes his responsibility for those who followed him and is willing to help all who are suffering, including her, but Eva doesn't believe his sincerity and runs away, failing to notice the recording device under the table. Returning to her hotel room, Eva talks to her boss, who informs her that Israel is demanding Al-Masih extradition and the state prosecutor will seek permission for it. Later, Al-Masih is taken to court where he is charged, which he admits to, and requests asylum. Eva goes to the lawyer, trying to convince her to stop fighting for the man's release to prevent his extradition. After all, if he returns to Israel, he will be imprisoned, but the lawyer refuses to talk about it. Meanwhile, Aviram again refuses to reveal what happened during the interrogation, whose recording he erased. He's suspended from the case and a hearing is scheduled. At this time, Felix tells his wife about his departure because he's needed by the Messiah. A multitude of Al-Masih's followers gather outside the courthouse. The hearing begins and the lawyer explains that the man cannot return to Israel where he will be persecuted for religious reasons. But the prosecutor claims that the man is lying about being a Muslim because he does not pray 5 times a day as required. The Messiah responds that he belongs to all denominations because everyone walks under the same sun. This causes a storm of emotions around the world, even in high-level offices. The assistant to the President of the United States tries to pressure the judge to deport the unwanted man, and the judge promises to consider it. Meanwhile, Samir finds his friend Jabril abandoned by Aviram in the desert, and he considers it a true miracle that he survived. The next day, the court makes the shocking decision to grant asylum to Mr. Masih, allowing him to leave the courthouse as a free man, with the car of the Venerable Iguero waiting for him outside. People all over the world are talking about the Messiah and beginning to believe in the miracles he performs. In Dili, those seeking healing begin to gather. The Reverend tries to organize their accommodation while Samir faithfully tends to Jabril. The Messiah brought by the pastor settles in isolation from people in a small tent where only Felix has access. One day, the preacher dares to ask Al-Masih about his future plans, and he says he does not know what will happen next. After all, Felix brought him here. And this instills despair in the preacher's soul. He thought that the Messiah was acting according to a preconceived plan. That same evening, Agent Will comes to Eva and shows her a recording of a conversation with Al-Masih. Then he shows her a book by one of the radicals, Wallace, about cultural terrorism, in which the words of the Messiah are repeated verbatim. It turns out that Al-Masih is acting according to this scenario, the goal of which is the destruction of the existing order. Meanwhile, things are going badly for the refugees who remain at the Israeli border without water and food, and soon Samir begins to wonder where Jabril's strong faith comes from. He calls his friend crazy for refusing medical help as his injuries could be fatal, and accuses him of an abnormal love for the Messiah. One day, Aviram's wife notices his car, which has been parked near their house for 3 days, and begins to search for the man, who at this time arrives in Texas and buys a gun at the gun store. And in Dili, every evening people gather together hoping that Al-Masih will come out to them. But the man remains in his tent, bringing Felix into a state of confusion that spills over into a sermon for all who have come. At this time, 2 residents of Dili finally find their dog crushed by furniture during the hurricane and try to free it. Al-Masih comes out of his tent just as armed Aviram approaches it. The Messiah calmly looks into the eyes of his killer, and Aviram lowers his gun and looks at the departing man's back. The people notice the Messiah, who is walking towards the house where the man decides to shoot the poor dog as it is suffering greatly. The boy asks Al-Masih to save his dog, but he takes a gun and shoots the dog, causing the boy's anger and pain, and then he leaves the town. At this time, Eva catches up with Aviram and he confesses that he wanted to kill the Messiah, who at that time calls pastor's daughter Rebecca to come with him. Meanwhile, the refugees decide that the Messiah has abandoned them and they decide to return to the city, but Jabril stays behind. In the morning, the young man dreams of his deceased mother, who turns into the Messiah and reaches out to him. At the same time, the Texas police ask the pilgrims not to come to Dili as the city is completely destroyed. Dissatisfied, the people are ready to expel Al-Masih and Father Felix. They write protest messages about the false prophet on the church walls. Meanwhile, Eva learns the true name of the Messiah by Yamgul Shari, and he has a brother who works at the university. The Messiah tells Father Felix that it is time to get on the road, persuading Felix that this is his destiny. The pastor decides to take his family with him, which upsets his wife but pleases his daughter. Father Felix leads a column of cars that follow the Messiah wherever he leads them. The number of cars is constantly growing, and soon it begins to count in the hundreds. Eva also returns to Texas to follow Al-Masih, and one night sees him come out to make a call from a payphone on the street. At her request, Agent Will requests a copy of the telephone conversation. The next day, the column continues on its way. Stopping for a break, the pastor hears news of the crisis on the border, where the refugees from Palestine are still waiting for their fate. Rebecca takes a picture of the Messiah standing by a road sign in Washington and posts it on social media. In the morning, the column sets off, and Felix learns from the posts that their path leads to the U.S. Capitol. At the same time, Eva checks everything she can find about the Messiah and comes across information that he studied at the same university where the notorious terrorist Wallace taught, whose book Al-Masih quoted during the interrogation. Professor Wallace hacked the stock exchange and then fled to Russia during the investigation into his actions. This means that the case of the alleged attack is completely within Eva's jurisdiction. The huge column arrives in Washington, and Al-Masih goes to the Lincoln Memorial, while Jabril has a vision of his late mother and Al-Masih. The Messiah speaks about the unity of people in the world around them, and Jabril suddenly stands up as if hearing his speech. Al-Masih asks to look at himself and his neighbors. Jabril strips naked. The Messiah stands before the nation and looks at them so that they finally look at him. It's too late to kneel, time is up. Jabril walks towards the border. Al-Masih heads for the water. Jabril walks non-stop until a soldier's gun barrel is pressed against his chest, and Al-Masih walks on the water. The Israelis retreat, and Jabril leads the refugees. Hundreds of amazed spectators follow the Messiah's journey and record this on their telephone cameras. The world is buzzing after witnessing the miracles of Al-Masih, and even the Congregation of the Causes of Saints is considering the case. Everywhere there are clashes between the followers and the opponents of the newly emerged Messiah. People are sending money to Father Felix, who intends to build the Church of Al-Masih with it. Meanwhile, Jabril arrives in western Jordan, where he is welcomed as a liberator. The refugees are brought to a secluded house where they will be given food and shelter. But Jabril is separated from the others as he openly declares his allegiance to Al-Masih. Meanwhile, Eva reports her findings to his superiors. The Messiah has a fairly long trail of connections to banned organizations and, most importantly, to Wallace, who is now hiding in Moscow. Senior officials in the U.S. government are concerned about the popularity of Al-Masih, so the head of the White House staff demands that the CIA do everything possible to discredit him. But Eva reminds them, this is not just terrorism, this is a new level of destabilizing society. Meanwhile, the society is discussing the Messiah with ever-increasing fervor. People are divided into those who unquestionably believe in him and those who consider him a false prophet. Felix preaches on behalf of Al-Masih and reminds people of the importance of faith. The Lord has chosen them specifically, and it is important to understand why. At this time, a woman with a terminally ill child sneaks into the hotel of the Messiah, and the man agrees to take the girl, but only alone. However, his room is under 24-hour surveillance. Meanwhile, the young refugees begin to learn different sciences, among which religion is at the forefront. Sheikh personally comes to Jabril to understand the depth of his faith, and the young man confidently answers that he unquestionably believes in the Messiah. Meanwhile, Eva discusses the Messiah's water-walking feat with Aviram. After all, Jesus did the same thing. He performed tricks and attracted supporters. The man is impressed. She speaks like a true Jew. Agent Will continues to monitor the Messiah's room and one day witnesses a girl knocking on his door, praying for healing. But the man immediately understands the true purpose of her visit. The girl has come to seduce him. He reveals her soul, pitying the woman who sells her body, and from this her soul melts and dies.
The girl admits that she was paid for the visit and cries from the moving words of the Messiah, who confesses to her the eternal love of God for his children. These words bring tears to Agent Will's eyes, who is watching the scene. At that time, Rebecca runs out of her parents' room and sees the Messiah escorting the girl out of his own room. The girl runs away and Al-Masih catches up to her on the street. He tries to explain her special place next to him, and the girl shares her observations that the world seems to be on the brink of something grand. The prophet turns to Rebecca and asks her to do something unimaginable, and she promises to do anything he asks. Meanwhile, the CIA manages to find Al-Masih's brother, who reveals that their parents were of different faiths and died early. The boys were raised by their uncle, a professional illusionist, and Al-Masih always loved being the center of attention. The uncle was a tough man, but he taught the boys everything he knew: English, literacy, and most importantly, how to perform tricks. And at that moment, someone puts a dark bag over Al-Masih's head as he enters his room. The man finds himself in the office of the President of the United States, standing before the head of state and demanding the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from around the world using the President's sincere faith. The politician is shocked. It's simply impossible, since the American troops are used precisely as peacekeepers, and if they are not present, there will be chaos in the countries under their control. However, the Messiah lists the names of countries and cities where Americans have been waging wars. He offers the president the chance to go down in history as a true peacemaker saving the world. And he says that the history has ended and the world will soon start anew. Meanwhile, Eva learns that a few years ago Al-Masih was placed in a psychiatric clinic and goes to the college where the men studied. But the director can't remember anything particularly noteworthy except for his thesis. Eva goes to the archives, but the thesis is not there. In Jordan, the Sheikh shows Jabril an article in a newspaper about the miracles of Al-Masih and asks him to give a speech at the upcoming celebration. The boy must become the leader of the new generation in the struggle for Palestinian independence. The next day, Al-Masih announces to the media about his meeting with the president, and this infuriates Felix, who believes that he should have been informed about it. The president also faces similar attacks. He is heavily guarded against this freak, but he himself goes to the meeting. However, the man interrupts all conversations. He must first think about the people. Angered, Felix expresses his grievance to Al-Masih, and the letter suggests that he kneel before him if he truly believes that he is the Messiah. The preacher thinks it over as the Messiah leaves the room. On the other hand, Agent Will begins to unquestionably believe in Al-Masih and quits his job. Meanwhile, Eva receives the call logs she requested. That same evening, Aviram asks Al-Masih about his family and mocks him, offering to walk on water again. But the man only smiles in response and asks a counter question: why isn't Aviram leaving? The agent can't answer. The president talks to Al-Masih again and he informs him that there is no more time to think. At that moment, water begins to flood the president's feet. Upon waking up, the man learns about an unprecedented flood destroying the U.S. coastline. Later, the daughter of the Reverend Iguero tells him that Al-Masih came to Texas for her, not for her father. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, a guard confesses that he was the one who freed the Messiah from prison, not Aviram Dahan. That same night, the girl hired by the president's assistant to compromise Al-Masih returns all the money she received for it. She doesn't care whether he's real or not. What matters to her is that he's a very good person. Meanwhile, the president flies over the affected areas and, in addition to providing material assistance, urges people to pray and hope for the help of the Lord. At the same time, the pastor's wife asks Al-Masih why he chose their family. He says that faith can be found everywhere, and he wants the same thing that the Lord wants: the flood. Meanwhile, in Jordan, the Sheikh is teaching Jabril about the speeches and Palestine's independence. It's very difficult for the illiterate boy to remember unfamiliar words, but the Sheikh is insistent. His friends are also being heavily influenced at this time, with religious ideas being drilled into their heads. Meanwhile, Reverend Felix asks a famous showman to include Al-Masih in his program. After all, it's a chance to speak to the multimillion audience. Eva checks all the numbers on the list and finds one that Al-Masih calls frequently and talks to the caller for quite some time. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is informed of the buildup of Russian troops on the border with Latvia and is demanded to make a tough decision. On that day, Eva finds Al-Masih to tell him that she knows about his diagnosis, Messiah complex, given to him in the psychiatric clinic, and about his uncle, the magician. She thinks someone is using him and promises to find and arrest the puppeteer. And he confirms that he knows Wallace, who is still his friend despite being accused of terrorism. After that, Felix tells Al-Masih about the invitation to television and he agrees, but only if the Reverend brings his daughter with him. In the evening, Eva talks to her father and is amazed to learn that her own father believes that Al-Masih is the Messiah of the end of times. Meanwhile, it turns out that the complex in the Badia is a terrorist training camp and Samira is being prepared for the role of a suicide bomber. Meanwhile, Eva decides to act on her own and dials the number that Al-Masih constantly calls. She hears Wallace's voice in response, so her theories about Al-Masih's connection to the terrorist are confirmed. But during the conversation, the man refutes all her conclusions. It's a pity, but she doesn't understand what's going on. And of the two of them, he is not the most dangerous one. The woman flips to his book again, reads the dedication on the title page and has an epiphany. Meanwhile, the president requests an analysis of full withdrawal of American troops from Eastern Europe. Eva goes to her boss. Wallace's book is the work of Al-Masih, so it's actually the opposite. The recognized terrorist is a disciple of the Messiah. In the meantime is the day of the television appearance. Al-Masih and Rebecca prepare for their performance. At the mosque, many believers come to listen to Jabril's first speech. The boy is very nervous, but the sheikh is nearby and guides him. The show host warms up the audience before the Messiah's appearance on stage, while Samira is also being taken to the mosque. But just before going on stage, the Messiah leaves the studio and gets into a car, while Samira puts on the suicide bomber belt. The audience demands the Messiah's appearance and Rebecca takes the stage. Jabril starts his speech about the Messiah simultaneously with Rebecca, while Al-Masih is driving in Aviram's car. The teenagers repeat his words to the audiences, "We are all one people." At that moment, Samir enters the mosque, shows the explosive device attached to his chest and raises the button. Looking into Jabril's eyes, he can't bring himself to press the button. However, Samir's mentor remotely activates the bomb vest. Rebecca suddenly loses consciousness in the studio. A powerful explosion rocks the mosque. The action moves back several years when Aviram and his partner kidnapped, interrogated and killed an underage son of one of those who had organized an explosion in which Aviram's mother died. But it turned out that the boy was not the man's son at all and it is still haunting the agent. In the present, he himself is driving the Messiah to the airport to deliver him to Israel. After the mosque bombing, the victims are given help. Unconscious Jabril is carried out on a stretcher. The same thing happens to Rebecca. Meanwhile, Eva Gela learns that Al-Masih has been kidnapped. The CIA tracks the plane on which he's being taken, unaware that it was all done on the orders of the president's assistant. Rebecca wakes up and tells her father that the Messiah is gone, and he will not return. Jabril wakes up in the back of a truck and sees a dead man next to him. He squeezes his hand and the fingers twitch under his palm. Eva finds out that the plane with the Messiah has taken off from a government airfield, and her boss tries to pressure higher-ups to find out the plane's destination, threatening to tell the president about everything that has happened and thus driving the country's leader's assistant into a corner. At the same time, in the sky, Al-Masih talks to Aviram, persuading him to free his conscience because God still loves him, and that people always choose between good and evil, and the last thing he will see before he dies is the face of that boy. Meanwhile, the president's assistant decides to reveal Al-Masih's true name to the press and the folder with his dossier, highlighting his mental illness and the fact that he was raised by an illusionist. In the sky, the plane begins to experience severe turbulence. There is an explosion in the tail and Aviram sees the face of the deceased boy in front of him, whose face is being covered by the Messiah's hands. In the command center, Eva is informed that the plane's signals have disappeared from the radar. She realizes that a tragedy has occurred. On TV, news reports reveal the Messiah's real name and biography, causing confusion among Al-Masih's followers. After hearing everything, Felix leaves the hospital. Jabril also watches Messiah's brother talk about his ability to perform magic tricks. Eva accuses the president's assistant of destroying the diplomatic plane, but he warns her to watch her tongue. The woman is overwhelmed because the entire operation has collapsed and she cannot prove anything. Meanwhile, Father Felix arrives at his church and sets it on fire. He no longer believes in anything. Meanwhile, Aviram wakes up in the middle of blooming poppies and sees the Messiah above him. Then a local boy appears before him, offering him a flask of water and enthusiastically stating that the man has performed the miracle. He resurrected Aviram and another man. They both were unquestionably dead, with gray faces and flies crawling over them. Then he touched them and they came back to life. The agent watches in amazement as his partner bows to the perfectly unharmed Messiah standing in front of him. The film is a story about the coming of the Messiah, the prophet, in the modern world. It is an interesting and easy-to-understand film with deep thoughts expressed by al-Masih in conversations with completely different people, ranging from an illiterate boy to the President of the United States. On the one hand, it is a weird combination, but on the other hand, it is quite understandable as the Messiah claims that we all walk under one sun.
Physics professor Jason Desson's morning begins as usual. An alarm clock rings, he checks his high school son Charlie's homework, and makes coffee for his beloved wife Daniela. The woman is in a hurry and grateful for the attention. However, she is adamantly against letting Charlie drive. Despite this, Jason trusts the boy with the car, and they nearly have an accident. The father calms his son and suggests he confess his feelings to a girl he likes. Meanwhile, Jason receives a call from his friend, Ryan, who is eager to share some good news. He has received a very prestigious scientific award and invites Jason to celebrate that evening. Later, Jason heads to the university, where he tries to explain the essence of Schrödinger's thought experiment to his students. He draws a cat locked in a box on the board. Inside the box, there's also a vial of poison, a radioactive atom, and a Geiger counter. If the atom does not decay, the cat survives. But if it does, the Geiger counter will detect radiation, the vial will break, and the cat will die. All this illustrates the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which posits that until the box is opened, the atom is in a state of superposition, undetermined. The lecture is interrupted by a phone call, and Jason watches as the students hurriedly leave without hearing that the cat is simultaneously alive and dead. Later, Jason enters a dark room, records the day's events in his notebook, and injects himself with dark matter. The scene shifts to the family kitchen, where Jason and Daniela are preparing dinner. Charlie teases his parents for kissing too often. Then messages from Ryan, who has been waiting at the bar for a while, arrive. Daniela insists that her husband should go meet his best friend. Jason relents and heads to the bar. Ryan is delighted by his arrival and orders Daniela's favorite drink, which the bartender notes is the last bottle. Ryan introduces his colleagues to Jason and unexpectedly offers him a position in his new consciousness research lab. There's one catch: the Center for Neuropsychology will be in San Francisco, and Jason is unsure if his family will want to move from Chicago. He promises to think about it and heads home, but on a dark street he is suddenly stopped by an armed man in a mask. Jason is ready to hand over everything valuable he has, but the robber seems interested in something else. He puts Jason in the car, calling him by name, and orders him to comply. Along the way, the robber unlocks his phone, knowing the password, and asks questions about Ryan. Soon they arrive at a deserted building where the robber orders Jason to undress. He complies, but still decides to attack the assailant. However, he receives a heavy blow to the head and immediately feels an injection in his neck. The robber tells him to put on different clothes and warns that Jason is being given a new opportunity. He should remember this thought because now he will have everything he ever dreamed of, and he's doing this for both of them. When Jason asks who the robber is, he's told it's better not to know. Jason's consciousness fades. He regains consciousness in a hospital ward. He is examined and sent to a shower stall. Eventually, Jason comes to his senses in an unfamiliar bedroom. He tries to leave, but the doors are locked. Suddenly, a woman he doesn't recognize enters, behaves as if she knows him well, and introduces herself as Amanda. She informs him that his body is clean and he is no longer in quarantine. Jason doesn't understand what is happening, but no one answers his questions. The second person Jason sees is Leighton, with whom he once worked a long time ago. Leighton congratulates him on his triumph and calls him the chief scientific officer. Then, the blinds open and numerous colleagues applaud Jason, welcoming back the only one who returned. He has been absent for 14 months and 10 days, and they all want to hear about his journey. Confused, Jason begins to talk about the meeting at the bar and the strange robber, but his patience runs out because he doesn't know the people around him and doesn't understand what's happening here. Leighton announces that he must stay here overnight. However, Jason pushes him away and starts to run. He manages to reach the exit where a security guard calls him by name and helps open the door. Jason flees the premises despite being pursued. He manages to catch a taxi, gives his address, and heads home. But upon entering, he finds his home changed beyond recognition. At the same time, in another reality, the new Jason returns from the bar and sees his upset wife Daniela. He embraces her, tells her about Ryan's offer, and reminds her of his long-ago choice to marry her, not a cold, sterile laboratory. The wife thaws and kisses her husband, unaware that this man is actually not her Jason. In another world, the first Jason meets Amanda in his home instead of his wife and son, who says they live there together. Jason does not believe this and begins to look for traces of his son, but Charlie's room looks completely different. Now it is Jason's own office, filled with awards for outstanding achievements and discoveries he has received over the years. He tries to call his wife Daniela, but the number is unavailable. Jason roams around the house trying to understand what is really happening. Meanwhile, Amanda makes a phone call, asking to handle the matter herself, but Jason sees a car with security arriving at the house and flees. In another reality, Daniela leads her husband into the bedroom and notices a wound on his arm. However, he assures her that she would not believe the truth and kisses her. Meanwhile, Jason 1 rushes to the bar he was at the night before, but the bartender refuses to recognize him, although the man calls him by name and reminds him of his favorite drink. Jason insists, but the bartender kicks him out, advising him to check his head. Then Jason goes to the hospital, where he undergoes a brain tomogram and is given sedatives. He constantly remembers Daniela and tries to find his wedding ring. At the same time, Jason 2 wakes up next to Daniela, kisses his wife, and surveys the kitchen, trying to find coffee. Simultaneously, the first Jason comes to and sees a doctor in front of him who tells him about the results of his tests. The fact is that an unknown psychoactive substance has been found in his blood, but according to all other indicators, he is completely healthy. At his request, they tried to find his family, but there is no one in Chicago with such names. The doctors also checked his file. The woman lists his achievements in science, which Jason himself does not remember, and she informs him that he had been missing for more than a year, and they would like to know where he was. Jason 1 himself checks his information and still finds Daniela, but under her maiden name. In this world, she continues to pursue painting, and her exhibition is supposed to open just today. At this time, Amanda, Leighton, and a security officer discuss the situation. The woman suggests calling the police. However, Leighton opposes the idea and the security officer suggests checking the hospital. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Jason steals a white coat and walks out into the hall where he sees the familiar security officer. He manages to avoid the encounter and leave the hospital. Jason 2 arrives at the university and, apologizing for his tardiness, continues the lecture. Jason 1 arrives at the exhibition hall. Hearing his name, the man is freely admitted inside, where he examines a modern installation. Later, he sees his own portrait among the displayed paintings and finds Daniela. He embraces her and tries to ask about Charlie, but the woman doesn't know who that is. Moreover, she is constantly being congratulated, and she introduces Jason as the inspiration for her success. Ryan arrives, very surprised by Jason's appearance, as there had been many varied rumors about his disappearance. The man is upset with Jason because he did a lot for him and Velocity. Hearing the company's name, from which he recently escaped, Jason begins to ask questions, but then Daniela starts a speech, which includes questions about unfulfilled dreams. Everyone was asking what he could have been, and advises remembering the other doors he could have entered. At the same time, in another world, Jason 2 listens to Daniela's stories about her work plans and gives advice to his son, which surprises his wife. Simultaneously, Jason 1, Ryan, and Daniela from the New World discuss plans. Jason suddenly proposes a hypothesis about a scientist, married to the woman of his dreams, who once went to a bar where he met an old friend who had received a prestigious award. But on the way back, he was attacked, and when he woke up, everything around him had changed. A brain check revealed no abnormalities, only an unknown substance was found in his body. For a practical joke, it was too elaborate, and he had not gone mad. Jason asks to explain how he inspired Daniela's creativity, and she reminds him that once he came to her and said that theoretically people exist in millions of parallel realities, and his decision to part with her was his biggest mistake in this world. Then he talked about some secret project and warned that they would not see each other again. Then Jason starts to describe their life together with their son, causing Ryan's anger and Daniela's tears. He describes his friend's achievements in his own world, but he leaves. At the same time, Jason 2 mixes up toothbrushes, causing his wife's confusion. And Jason 1 receives permission to spend the night in Daniela's guest room, and looking around he finds an elastic band, which he wraps around his ring finger, mimicking a wedding ring. Meanwhile, Jason 2 perplexes his wife with unusual tenderness and examines the photographs on the walls of the house, after which he calls Ryan and declines his offer to work in San Francisco. At this time, Jason 1 calls Amanda and tells her that he is going to the psychiatric hospital. The woman heads there, but it turns out to be a ruse that Jason used to lure her out of the house, and now he and Daniela are inspecting his home together. The man points to a photo, but in his world they are depicted as a family in it. He talks about a son who is as talented as his mother, and Daniela admits that after he left her, she got rid of the child. Jason doesn't believe this, as everything was different, but Daniela insists that in her world, that's exactly what happened. People cannot understand why their memories differ so much, but the woman starts to believe his stories. Later, he finds records of his double from this world and realizes that he made a great discovery in quantum physics. Jason number 2 created a more voluminous version of the container where a person was put into superposition and gained the ability to move between multiple realities. It turns out that his double, Jason number 2, moved to his world and sent Jason number 1 to his dimension, to this world. So Jason is one person, living in reality until the question of marrying Daniela came up. When the first Jason chose his family, the second left Daniela. Their universes split, and the second Jason gave himself to science and invented the container. They switched worlds, but why? Later, Daniela admits that she is glad he appeared, and he explains the rubber band on his hand as a desire to preserve the marriage and return to his wife. He talks about their life there, in another reality, and admits that they were happy. Daniela kisses him, but at that moment, someone knocks at the door. They go to open it, and a security officer from the company Velocity, from which Jason had escaped, bursts into the house. He asks not to use weapons, but the woman shoots Daniela, and the last thing Jason sees is her blood-covered face. This is the first 2 episodes of a new series from Apple TV titled Dark Matter. At night, Leighton informs Amanda about what happened, and she rushes to the center where Jason has been taken. Leighton, in the meantime, apologizes to the tied-up Jason. He couldn't imagine his friend was so unstable and cannot release him yet. Jason, shocked by Daniela's murder, does not want to talk about his supposed genius invention. Jason 2 invites Daniela 1 to a cafe. She is surprised by her husband's behavior, but likes this new Jason. Moreover, they have a dinner planned for close friends the next day, something their family hasn't done in a long time. In a parallel reality, a detective visits Leighton, surprised by yet another disappearance of an employee from their lab. Before this, Blair and a couple of junior employees also vanished. Leighton pretends to know nothing. The detective goes to Amanda. Later, Amanda expresses her displeasure. She is very upset with Don's behavior, while the boss reminds her of the millions spent. If everything comes out, the project will be shut down. They don't understand what happened to Jason, who decides to play along with the colleagues and asks for help in remembering everything. Leighton takes him to a hangar where a huge metal box stands. Jason recalls trying to create a small Schrodinger's box once, but Leighton convinces him that he managed to make a huge box that can easily fit several people. Only Jason knows how it works. The man steps inside, but there are no panels or screens. Recording devices don't work either. Jason is told about the missing people and then shown footage of him emerging from the box. Jason 2 takes Charlie to a store, buys him an expensive skateboard, surprising his son with generosity, and then questions him about the family friends coming to dinner tomorrow. In a parallel reality, Amanda tells Jason 1 that she works as a psychiatrist in the lab, and they have been living together for over a year. Before he disappeared, he met with his ex-girlfriend and then just vanished. Jason suddenly suggests he might not be who she thinks he is. Amanda leaves completely puzzled. Meanwhile, in the parallel reality, Jason 2 welcomes the guests. He keeps conversations going, displaying knowledge of everyone's lives gleaned from social networks, and talks with his son. Jason 1 tries to answer Leighton's questions, who begins to suspect him of being an imposter. The man is beaten, forced to reveal the whereabouts of their Jason, but he knows nothing and cannot explain how the container works. Leighton asks him to strain his memory, as there might be a way to reach a world where cancer is cured. However, all is in vain. Daniela thanks her husband for the wonderful evening. She hasn't seen him like this in a long time, and he seems completely changed. At the same time, in the parallel world, Ryan is thrown into Jason's room, horrified to learn of Daniela's death, as he was the one who told Leighton that Jason went to her. Ryan had created a drug for Jason that changes the chemical composition of the brain's cortex, temporarily putting some parts to sleep. Jason admits he is not the Jason Ryan knew in this world. The drug creates a special effect that, combined with the container, allows for traveling between worlds. Layton's men take Ryan away. Meanwhile, in the parallel world, Jason too tells his wife he nearly died under the wheels, prompting him to reassess his life and express his gratitude for her presence. In the neighboring world, Amanda enters Jason's room, ordering him to follow her as she intends to get him out of there. They walk through the corridors but encounter a guard who raises the alarm. Jason and Amanda run to the container. They are chased, but Jason closes the iron door, cutting off Don's fingers. Amanda injects both herself and Jason with the drug that aids in transferring. Jason too, in the meantime, reviews family archives and finds a birth certificate of another son, Max. In an alternate world, Jason 1 and Amanda find themselves in a dark corridor with many doors. Layton, angered by their disappearance, enters the container himself. Jason and Amanda proceed through the corridor, but all doors look the same. The man suggests the doors lead to other worlds. They step out into one and find themselves on the street of a dead city. There is ash and smoke everywhere. They look around and notice a house in front of them starting to crumble. They rush back to the container, barely making it. Coughing, Amanda shows a case with the remaining doses of the drug, 48 in total. According to the coordinates, the container stands in the same place as in her world, meaning only the external world changes. They inject themselves again and head to the next reality. Layton also enters the corridor, searching for the pair, but without success so far. Jason too attends a lecture in place of his double, but realizing the students are uninterested, he leaves the auditorium, announcing his resignation. Jason 1 and Amanda step into another world and find themselves in a forest. They continue and enter a reality without an atmosphere after a nuclear explosion. The woman's nerves give way, but Jason explains it's a multiverse where everything that could happen did happen. They will soon need food and water, so they must find a habitable world. He opens another door, and the pair end up in the Velocity facility, witnessing Layton and Don killing their doubles. Jason manages to push Amanda into the container and close the doors. Later, they open the next doors but find dead worlds everywhere. Exhausted, Amanda rushes through the first door she sees, with Jason hurrying after her. They find themselves in the midst of a snowstorm. The woman loses consciousness from the cold. Jason searches for a bunker but sees a house nearby. He breaks a window, carries Amanda inside, wraps her in a blanket, and lights a fire in the fireplace. Meanwhile, Jason too visits Layton in his world. Here too, he is rich but spends his time idly. Jason offers him to become his investor in a very unusual venture. In the snowy world, Jason 1 steps outside and sees a completely frozen city. Jason 2 takes Layton 2 to a bunker and offers him the substance. Jason 1 returns to the house, finds a family photograph of the owners, and remembers his own family. His wife pulls out a photo of their second son, who is no longer there. Amanda, warming up, learns that the container is buried in snow and finding it is impossible. She recalls being stuck in a snowstorm. Jason suddenly realizes this might have triggered their arrival in the frozen world. Perhaps they can choose where to move. Jason too shows Layton to the container and promises to show him the path not taken. Instantly, the corridor with doors appears before them. Amanda and Jason, armed with probes, begin searching for the container in the snowdrifts. Suddenly, Amanda realizes that the compass always points in the same direction, indicating the container's approximate location. They head that way and soon find the box. In the neighboring universe, Daniela and Charlie walk to the memorial tree. Simultaneously, Jason starts telling Amanda about his second son. Daniela recounts the same story to Charlie. Once, Jason and Daniela were thrilled to learn they were expecting twins, but Max had a weak heart and died. They planted a tree, mixing their son's ashes with the soil. Every birthday, they sit under it and remember the boy. Layton too, meanwhile, is delighted by what he sees. Jason tells him about his life in the world where Layton was his research partner. The tycoon agrees to fund his work. Jason 1 narrates his abduction to Amanda. He doesn't understand why his double went to such lengths. After questioning him about his life, Amanda suggests that the double simply wanted to fix Jason 1's life, making him happy while also taking what he himself lacked, a family. Daniela and Charlie discuss their father's strange behavior, but then Jason too arrives, congratulates his son on his birthday, and gives him car keys. To his stunned wife, he confesses he quit his job but assures her not to worry about money as he has returned to science and already found a sponsor. She can pursue her passion for painting. Jason 1 and Amanda experiment in front of the next door. Jason tries to set a mood, outlining the conditions for the next world. Everything should be peaceful and beautiful, but opening the door, the pair end up in water. The city is flooded. With great difficulty, they close the container door. Amanda asks him to analyze his feelings, and Jason thinks he understands the mistake, but the woman is convinced that lying won't work here. Later they rest, reminiscing about their loved ones. Amanda admits she loves special candies, but they don't exist in Jason's world. The woman reveals that the first to test the container was Engineer Blair, followed by 2 volunteers. Soon the drug's effect wears off. Amanda opens the door and the pair find themselves in the Velocity basement. Initially, they want to escape, but hunger takes over. They look around, but the cafeteria is closed and the elevator doesn't work. Amanda recalls a protocol designed for such a situation. They find a bedroom with someone lying under a blanket, but it's a shriveled body. It becomes clear that something terrible happened in this world. As they prepare to return to the container, a person with a gun stops them, but upon closer inspection, Amanda recognizes Blair. After joyful embraces, Jason tells Blair everything that happened. In his world, he knows her as his wife's friend, but there, she works as a lawyer. Blair leads them to a habitable area and offers them food. She arrived here 3 months ago when nothing worked. She managed to start the generators and access the system, discovering that Earth was overrun by creatures that devoured all living things. She went outside for food and saw the dead world. Blair also has drug vials but is not yet ready to leave. Jason 2 and Layton continue to explore the bunker. They compare their worlds, finding similarities and differences. Jason 2 explains that money varies between worlds, and carrying it is dangerous. One must be careful and honest. Blair reminds Amanda that Jason belongs to another world, so she must decide where she wants to be without considering him. Blair refuses to join them, not ready to re-enter the container. Layton, having visited the first world, is thrilled. Jason is ready to let him go, believing he has prepared him. Blair gives the pair her diary, describing the world she saw. Unfortunately, she has few vials left. Jason and Amanda leave. In the corridor, Amanda suddenly cries. Jason 2 ruined lives, knowing how to use the container. Jason 1 consoles her. Emboldened, Layton promises Jason 2 $1 million for the next doses of the drug. Jason 1 decides to write in Blair's diary what he wants to see behind the next door. He thinks the method worked, and they finally arrived in his world. But stepping outside, they notice unusual emptiness. They manage to open a car and drive to his house. The door is opened by a haggard Daniela. She says Jason was taken to the hospital and the deceased, Charlie, lies in his room. The man runs outside, encountering a medical patrol. A female doctor goes inside, while another doctor performs a rapid test on Jason. The returning doctor says hospitals are full, and Daniela is better off dying at home. The end is near. The virus spreads through body fluids, so Jason should avoid touching Daniela. She gives him several morphine injections, advising him to ease his wife's passing. Amanda tries to keep him from entering the house, reminding him that this is not his world and not his wife. But Jason returns. They reminisce about good moments that turn out to be very similar in both worlds. Then the woman takes the syringe. Jason and Amanda return to the container. The woman reminds him that they were talking about Jason's mother's illness. That's why they ended up in a world dying from a pandemic. The pair continues on. They arrive in a world that, at first glance, doesn't differ from Jason's. Meanwhile, Jason 2 apologizes to his wife for the unilateral decision to buy their son a car. The woman points out that such things are becoming more frequent. Her husband seems to be distancing from her, even missing the gathering at the tree. He tells her about Layton, who will pay huge sums for his discoveries. Jason enters his house, but upon hearing voices upstairs, he grabs a knife from the kitchen. Daniela screams in fear upon seeing him, and Charlie rushes into the room. They both act as if they are mortally afraid of Jason. The woman grabs the phone and tells emergency services that her arrested husband has come to her with a knife. Charlie shouts at him to leave. Frightened, Jason exits the house as a siren sounds in the distance. Amanda takes him to her friend, but the friend is horrified. In this world, Amanda is dead, and the friend mourns her deeply. Amanda tells her that she is in a better world and then takes the car keys. They drive to the container. In Jason 2's world, the container opens, and he steps out, retrieving backpacks with drugs. A lab assistant who rushes out tells him about his double's appearance and his escape with Amanda. Jason 2 returns to the corridor, where he hands doses to Layton. He then informs him that he will have to seal this world. Daniela from Jason's original world starts painting, and her husband's double is thrilled, suggesting she leave the gallery and focus solely on painting, especially since the deal with Layton is sealed. Later, he picks up their son and treats him to ice cream with nuts, not knowing the boy is allergic to them. Daniela can't understand how he could forget such a thing. Then she notices injection marks on his arms. In the evening, he uses dental floss, something he has never done, and Daniela becomes increasingly puzzled. Jason 1 and Amanda continue searching for his world, but they keep finding discrepancies. A different door color, a dog's presence, the absence of the memory tree, and similar things. Amanda suggests they rest at a hotel and have dinner at a normal cafe. Over the meal, they laugh a lot and then dance. At night, Jason hugs Amanda but stops, realizing they are not together. Jason 2 visits a psychotherapist who turns out to be Amanda's double. He talks about his relationship with Daniela and the disappointments he has faced. She suddenly reminds him that expectations can be overly high. Daniela complains to her friend Blair about his strange changes, and Blair advises her to keep an eye on her husband. In the evening, Jason asks his wife to wear a new dress and takes her to the gallery where he has hung her painting. Instead of gratitude, Daniela is horrified and asks to be taken home. She is very angry about his unilateral action, which she feels has humiliated her. Jason admits he never really knew her and is trying to make her happy against her wishes. Leaving his wife at home, he drives away, unaware that she is following him. Soon, they arrive at a warehouse where Daniela sees a locker her husband uses. Waiting for him to leave, she takes out a couple of vials lying on the floor. Later, she gives one to Ryan, asking him to analyze the drug. Meanwhile, Jason 1 finds the Daniela of this world. She also runs a gallery but doesn't recognize him during their conversation. Amanda also finds her double, but here the woman is married and has a son. At night, Jason goes to his house and watches his wife embrace his copy. Amanda, in the meantime, describes her ideal world. When Jason returns, a quarrel ensues because Amanda loses faith that they will find his world, as they only have 10 vials left. Ryan accuses Jason 2 of stealing his research, as the drug in his vial is identical to his own. Jason 2 takes his friend to the container. He injects the drug into himself and Ryan ends up in the corridor with doors to other worlds. Realizing he is in a quantum state, he is thrilled. Jason explains how to tune into another reality, and upon opening a door, Ryan sees a fantastically beautiful Chicago. This world is kinder and more progressive because Jason made it so for his friend. He asks for Ryan's phone to take a picture of him and steps back to the door. Ryan realizes this is not his friend. Jason just closes the door, leaving the man in another world. Later, he sees that Daniela is calling Ryan. Then Layton's men arrive and pack up the container. Sometime later, a detective comes to Jason's house, investigating Ryan's disappearance. The couple tells her about their last encounters with the friend, and Jason 2 suddenly states that Ryan drank a lot, although he never drank alcohol. After this, Daniela shows him the remaining vial and confesses she has been following him. He explains that Ryan made the drug for Jason 2's research because he is reviving his project. Amanda leads Jason 1 into a world she has imagined. This Chicago is beautiful. They walk through a clean and cozy city, enjoying friendly faces. They drink cocoa from edible cups and then have a snack in a cafe where they learn about a trendy restaurant in the tallest tower in the city. Amanda leaves, setting up a meeting with Jason there. A nearby couple gives him a photo they took, admiring them. Later, Jason goes to the restaurant and sees Amanda in an evening dress. She gives him a suit she bought for him, and he changes and joins her. Jason gives her her favorite candies, which exist in this world. She laughs, saying he is an insurance agent here. Her double in this world disappeared 2 years ago. Taking advantage of their identical appearance, Amanda made a passport and gained access to the double's savings, so she decided to stay here. She invites Jason to join her, but he declines. Before leaving, Jason secretly places 2 of the remaining vials in her purse. Amanda cries in the elevator, but, seeing the sun, wipes her tears and heads into a new life. Jason goes to the container. He has only 3 vials left, and the next world is destroyed. He continues, and in the next reality, he calls his wife. She is surprised, as she just saw him off to work, but Jason confesses his love to her. At night, he sneaks into his house and sees Daniela hugging his copy, but going down to the kitchen, he encounters his son, and it is not Charlie. It turns out that here they managed to save Max by transplanting the heart of a deceased girl, and now he suffers from guilt. Jason 1 comforts him. Meanwhile, Jason 2 confesses to the psychotherapist Amanda that he wants to pack up and leave his wife. Then suddenly he tells very personal things about the doctor herself. She kicks him out, but outside, Jason 2 is met by a detective. They tracked Ryan's phone and know that after the bar, he went to the industrial part of the city, so she intends to check all the cameras located there. Jason, too, goes to the container and breaks the formwork. He finds Ryan's double in the first world, where he works as a simple mechanic, gets him drunk, brings him to his world, cleans him up, and puts him to sleep in Ryan's bed. Jason 1 takes out the last vial and writes in Blair's diary his memories of the first meeting with Daniela. He saw the living Max and even thought of treating his double in that world as he had been treated. But he realized he only wants his family, his home, and his life. Jason 1 opens the door and finally arrives in his world. He heads home, checking all the details along the way, but upon approaching the house, he sees himself telling Daniela that he found Ryan in a wild drunken state. He had to clean his friend up and take him home. Jason 1 goes to a store to buy a gun, but without a permit, he buys pepper spray and a hunting knife. A minute later, Jason 2 enters the same store and repeats his double's actions. The stunned shop assistant remarks that they were just discussing buying a gun. She asks if he has a twin brother. Realizing his prototype has returned, Jason 2 runs outside but finds no one. Friends, if you've watched this far, pay closer attention because the most confusing part of the plot is about to begin. He returns home where Charlie informs him that Mom went to Ryan, who is behaving very strangely. Jason 2 goes outside and is attacked by another Jason in a hat, whom he kills in a fight. Meanwhile, Ryan, seeing Daniela, claims that he is an auto mechanic and repairs her car in his world, not a scientist-chemist. He recalls a man offering him alcohol and recognizes Jason from a photo. Jason checks his gear and stepping into the hallway encounters himself, but the double runs away, and Jason gives chase. At this time, Jason 2 loads the body of the killed double into a car, and Jason 1 catches up with his double in a bar. They realize that their copies multiply in a container, and it's unclear how many there could be, but they all aimed for this particular Chicago, as their prototype was desperate to get home. Amanda appeared in all realities. Only in one did she die in a terrible world. And for Jason 1, she remained in the best world. Both are out of vials and cannot help each other. Jason 3 suggests getting rid of the one who caused all this. Jason 2 doesn't know about the place where they both love to rest. They need to lure the villain there and kill him. Besides, Jason 3 has already dug a grave there, and he also has a gun. The next morning, Jason 1 goes to the bar, where he lights a cigar despite the strict prohibition. He is taken to the police station. Meanwhile, Daniela plans to take her husband's large car to move some things to the gallery, but he rudely forbids her. And Jason 2 drives his son to the university, showing him memorable places on the campus, when he notices Jason 3 watching them. Daniela goes to the storage box again and breaking the doors, finds bags with unknown currency, a box of vials, and Ryan's jacket. But then she gets a call from the police. Jason 2 guides Charlie through the building and their pursuer loses sight of them. The father asks his son to take the car and meet him at another exit, even though he doesn't have a license yet. Confused, Charlie leaves, and Jason 2 tries to throw Jason 3 off his trail, but he also knows the university building well. Eventually, the men engage in a fight, and the second Jason wins. Charlie makes a failed maneuver, attracting a policeman's attention, and Jason 2 knocks out the third and locks him in a toilet stall. Meanwhile, the policeman demands Charlie's license, but at that moment, Jason 2 appears, managing to persuade the officer to let them go. At this moment, Daniela sees her husband at the station. It turns out Jason was looking for a place where they could talk safely. He tells his wife the truth, but she doesn't believe him. Then Jason suggests calling him. Daniela dials her husband's number, and Jason answers. She hangs up, then Jason asks her to call again and remind him of their great vacation in Miami, though they never actually went there. Daniela does this, adding made-up details about the vacation, and that Jason agrees, pretending to remember the trip. Now Daniela believes her real husband, who says there are other versions of him. They agree on a code word in a meeting place, and Daniela goes to get their son. But at home she finds her husband, Jason 2, who orders her to pack because they need to leave urgently. The mother tries to talk to her son, but Jason 2 is on guard and doesn't let them do it. The woman leaves supposedly to get a suitcase and messages Charlie. The boy leaves first, and Daniela lures her husband into the basement and pushes him down the stairs. They drive away, but another car with yet another Jason behind the wheel cuts them off. Daniela realizes this is another version of her husband. At this moment, they are rammed by a car driven by yet another Jason. Daniela and Charlie flee. Soon they reach the place where Jason 1 is waiting for them. He says the code word and hugs his son. Meanwhile, Jason's family leaves the city. Suddenly, Daniela and Charlie start receiving messages from numerous other Jasons, assuring them that only they can protect them. The woman turns off the gadgets. Her husband can't choose a place where they can hide, as the other Jasons might also guess where to look for them. Then Charlie takes over and shows the way to a friend's vacant house. Charlie is puzzled by the number of fathers, as, theoretically, they all are his father in some way. Jason suggests they sleep first and then make decisions. Daniela sympathizes with his adventures, but those other Jasons are suffering too. The woman goes to bed, while Jason checks his email and suddenly sees an entire chat of 44 Jasons arguing over who gets Daniela and Charlie. In the morning, Jason finds his wife on the beach. She admits that at first, she liked the new Jason, but gradually she realized he wasn't the one she loved. Her husband tells her he sometimes thought about a new life. Apparently Jason too also thought about this, so he moved to their world. He recalls Daniela number 2, who became an artist, lived in a luxurious apartment, and had lots of friends. Jason 3 also studies the chat, trying to figure out where his double went. Suddenly he gets a message from Blair asking to return the car. He realizes Daniela borrowed a car from a friend and asks her to come urgently. At this time, Jason tells his wife about the chat, and one of them suggesting to raffle her and Charlie in a lottery. Jason too questions the third about what happened to him in other worlds. He tells about the death of Daniela and Ryan and the suffering of Amanda, who loved that Jason very much. In the reality of the third Jason, she died in the forest, impaled by a giant tree branch. Jason too begins to understand the horror of his actions, as he hoped to make his double happy with a new life. Meanwhile, Charlie prepares breakfast and tells Jason the latest news from their life, deciding where to go next. At this time, Blair arrives at their house and finds Jason 3 tied up in a closet. The third attacks her and demands to track her car, but Blair manages to neutralize him and demands to tell her the truth about the ongoing madness. Jason tells his wife and son about other realities. They are amazed that their doubles live in a few microns away, unseen by them. Jason admits that there was one world where he almost stayed but couldn't imagine life without his family. Later, Daniela reads his chat. They spend the night together, reminiscing about their first meeting. She admits she made a choice and informed the other Jasons. But later, Jason suddenly sees a shadow outside the window, and going outside, finds an injured double, who says he was hit by one of them. There are many of them here, and it won't end just like that. Gunshots are heard in the dark, and Jason asks his wife to run to their son, but then another armed double calls out to him, demanding his clothes and the code word. Jason 1 charges at him. A fight ensues, but a shot rings out, and the double falls. It turns out to be Jason 2, who realized his guilt. He asks for their forgiveness, gives them car keys, and asks them to leave. The family drives into the night, while the second Jason shoots back at the other doubles, giving them a chance to escape. Here they find a suitcase with a device for traveling between worlds in the car, and a phone with a recorded message, in which Jason 2 admits that he entered the container full of regret about the world where the family he didn't create lived, and now he offers to find them a new home in another world. The family heads to the container, where they are met by dozens of Jason doubles who understood that the woman made a choice and came to say goodbye. The family walks into the container through the line of Jasons. There, they trust Charlie to choose a new world where they will all be happy. Charlie opens the door and steps into another reality, followed by his parents. This concludes the first season.
The day comes when scientists in one of the biotechnology laboratories begin to clone famous personalities for very large fees, of course. In fact, many rich people would like to have a child of a genius like Vivaldi, Galileo, or Michelangelo. Soon, however, people decide to take a swing at something far more valuable: God himself. After Lucifer rebelled against the power of God in heaven, he was defeated by the archangel Michael, and flaming meteor was thrown into the underworld, where he had to remain in chains and punishing flames. Michael himself chained him to a rock and cried out to return as a humble angel, to which Lucifer replied that he would rather reign in hell than serve in paradise, and he threatened that he would return as ruler of the world. Over time, Lucifer was joined by numerous demons as he craved revenge. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lucifer's disciples set up a temple at the site of his fall into the abyss, and they believe that one day he will return to rule on Earth. Our time. Laura Milton, an American student, is trying to persuade her professor to accept her thesis on the theme that there are no evil or good spirits, but he refuses, offering to discuss the subject in an intimate setting. But now the girl refuses. At the same time, a rare exhibition begins at the museum, the Shroud of Turin, which contains the DNA of Jesus and is a record of the fact of his resurrection. Everything is on display. Laura enters the museum after receiving a pass, a badge from a priest she knows. Marconi explains that Christ was wrapped in the shroud the day he died, but that when he rose from the dead, his body shone so brightly that his imprint remained on the cloth. Thus, the shroud is a picture of Jesus. The priest then escorts Laura to the statue of the Archangel Michael, who has been brought to the museum to guard the shroud. The War of the Angels was the first war and the first evil, but Laura disagrees. Evil is not an external mystical force, it is a personality, and when trouble happens to loved ones, it is foolish to blame the devil. But Marconi is sure that only Michael stands between the devil and men. There are many prophecies that Lucifer will return, but the father hopes that he will not find a way out. The priest leaves to go about his business, and Laura gets comfortable and begins to draw. Suddenly, she hears her name, but no one is around. She calms down and continues to work. It's evening and the gallery is about to close. The last group of tourists enters the museum, and while the guard is distracted for a moment, a figure in a black cloak separates from the group and makes his way through a side door. Despite the late hour, Laura is still working when she thinks Lucifer's head on the statue is moving, followed by the cry of a raven. The girl walks to the window without noticing the sinister figure behind her, who pulls a sword from Michael's hand and walks away. Laura closes the window and gathers her things. The guard is ready to escort her out, but she refuses. She still has to see Padre Marconi. She goes to the chapel and sees a figure in black slaying the guard with a sword. The girl runs away in terror and hides in the confessional, watching as the woman with the sword breaks the glass over the shroud. Padre Marconi arrives at the noise and, in the name of Saint Michael, demands that the sacrilege cease, but the woman throws him aside and pierces him with her sword. Laura moves carelessly and the villain notices her. She orders her underlings to take the shroud and the girl, hoping that he might like her. The bandits leave while the mortally wounded priest summons the Archangel Michael to occupy his body and defeat his enemies. Immediately, a luminous whirlwind descends from the heavens and the father comes to life. He tries to catch up with the villains, but they drive away. The plot is moved to a private auction where one of the scientists, Dr. Laurent, explains that he has managed to create a procedure by which he can grow babies from the DNA of great men, thus resurrecting the most prominent figures in the history of mankind. And as proof, he presents the reincarnation of the great Vivaldi and his proud parents. The next lot, he presents the new Michelangelo Buonarroti, and the whole rises in a burst of delight. The bidding begins when a woman in black appears in the gallery and beckons to the doctor. He rushes to her call. The pair travel to the devil's castle where the doctor sees the shroud. At last, Lucifer will have a decent home. Meanwhile, Laura is dragged into some room where several girls are already sitting in chains. All of them are horrified by what is happening and do not understand why they are there. A few men enter, take a blood test and photograph Laura, while Father Marconi, or rather the Archangel Michael in his body, makes his way to the guard room where two monks are watching the murder videos. Seeing the one who was murdered in front of them alive, they are astonished as he finds out where the keepers of the shroud were and how could they have allowed this to happen. It is explained to him that the cardinal responsible for everything is not himself at the moment. He sees secret cults and the devil's minions. And now he is in the asylum of Saint Michael. Archangel takes the car keys and drives to the cardinal's house, while the doctor isolates DNA from the blood traces on the shroud. The old cardinal meets Michael with a gun and upon learning of what has happened becomes enraged. He warned them, but looking into the man's eyes he realizes he is not Marconi. The cardinal shows Michael Lucifer's castle and suggests that his minions intend to revive him. He reminds him the scriptures say that one day the devil will be freed from his chains and will rise from the underworld. Apparently the time has come. Two monsters are responsible for his release, a woman and an underground monster, but only Michael himself or God can set Lucifer free. The devil's minions have offered him the bodies of virgins for centuries to get a vessel for the devil, but human bodies are too weak. Although there was one woman in history who was able to bear and give birth to a son of God. And today science is ready to open the gates to the devil using Christ's DNA. Michael asks to be taken to the castle. Meanwhile, the girls try to devise an escape plan and share their experiences. It turns out that Laura's husband and son are dead. Instruments inform the doctor of a successful DNA extraction, and the walls in the underworld begin to crumble, heralding the devil's release, while the doctor informs Liz of a complete match of all the right parameters with Laura's body. And the women wait for the attendants to arrive and pounce on them. It seems that they will succeed, but another group rushes to the rescue and the girls are dragged into the laboratory. They are laid on tables and despite desperate resistance, fertilized eggs are injected into their bodies. Liz convinces Laura to put up with it, for Lucifer is bound to like her. In the meantime, Cardinal escorts Michael to the entrance to the dungeon and warns of caution. A monster awaits ahead. At this time, the devil's minions gather in the hall with the well. Two impregnated girls are tied to a pillar in the center, and the monster who has come out takes them and leads them to the gateway to the underworld. The girls are put in an iron cage and lowered down, while Lucifer is already waiting for them. Sensing the approach of the possible Holy Mothers, he removes their collars and, transformed into a luminous stream, rushes towards them. The women are seized by the subterranean monsters and the stream enters one of them, but her body fails and she dies. Then the glowing worm enters Laura's body. Liz and the servants greet the living woman with delight. The choice is made. She is escorted into a glass cage where it is explained that her child will be the new Jesus. Meanwhile, Michael sneaks inside the castle and, having obtained a guard's uniform, finds the shroud and tries to find Laura. The doctor enters, but Michael rejects him and sets fire to the laboratory. He finds Laura, but the woman realizes it is not her longtime friend. She runs away. The archangel has to run after her. He manages to drag her into a storage room where he explains who he is and finds out exactly what was being done to the woman. The couple escapes when Liz is informed that the shroud is missing. She gives an order to detain Laura at all costs, and the guards rush in after her. Laura and Michael in the meantime try to hide from the underground monster in narrow passages, but it catches up with them and attacks the archangel. And while he wages a hard fight, Laura is grabbed by the guards. The enraged woman threatens Liz to kill herself and the child, and she orders her to be taken to a cell. Meanwhile, Michael is captured and put on a chain in the dungeon while Laura is tied to a bed. Liz is willing to do anything to keep the baby. After gathering all his strength, Michael breaks the chains and frees himself, while the castle guards search for the shroud hidden in the dungeon. The monster manages to see the archangel descend into the underworld. After reaching the bottom, he's attacked by the imprisoned souls and discovers that Lucifer has been freed and his sword is missing. Then the demon of greed, Mammon, flies to him and announces that they will soon close the gate and Michael will remain here instead of Lucifer, and he scoffs at his foolishness to come down in a mortal body. The archangel is chained to the rock with Lucifer's sword. Laura meanwhile sees her child in an ultrasound, and he suddenly calls out her name. The woman wakes up terrified and sees Liz nearby, who finds out what Lucifer told her, and then tells the story of a brave warrior and a tyrant who were equals. But the tyrant wanted the warrior to be his slave, but he refused, and soon he would rise up and join the fight. Laura speaks unflatteringly of the demon, for which she is slapped in the face. After which Liz explains the transformation happening to her body by the need to make it comfortable for the divine child. But the woman doesn't want to accept her imposed role as the mother of an incomprehensible creature. Meanwhile, the people who were given to Lucifer come to Michael, pronouncing the oath, "Saved one, saved all," and questioning him about his origins. Discovering that it is Michael himself, they demand proof, but Michael needs a sword. At this point, they are attacked by demons. The men flee. Laura is again visited by the worm Lucifer, who goes inside her. He speaks to her and convinces her to give birth to the baby he wants, after which she can do what she wants, even kill Liz. The woman calms down and sees herself with the baby in her arms. But one day she frees herself and terribly mutilates the guards and escapes from the ward. When she sees the consequences of her actions, she is horrified. What has been done to her? She manages to make her way to a warehouse, and after locking herself inside, she drinks a canister of chlorine. Liz finds it and promises that soon Lucifer will consume her completely, and then she will find peace. But then Laura suddenly gains unprecedented strength, grabs the hated Liz and spews the contents of her stomach on her. From Laura's womb, Lucifer himself begins to speak to Liz and demands that the woman be killed as soon as he is born, and to destroy all who knows of what is happening. Laura is imprisoned in a glass sarcophagus to prevent any further attempts to kill the child, and Lucifer returns to the underworld where he sees Michael and taunts him. He offers an alliance that no one will be able to defeat, but the archangel refuses to support the rebel. He thanks Michael for his new home, the body of Jesus himself, which will be his own. Lucifer flies away, and the archangel suddenly realizes this is not at all what he thought. It is not the devil but God who has chosen Laura. She will give birth to Christ, not the devil's vessel. He asks the people to bring his sword, but the demons are close and the sword is heavy. But two men risk their lives to bring the weapon, and Michael is set free. He dispels the demons and promises to return for his saviors. Michael returns to Earth and finds the shroud. Then he goes to Laura's sarcophagus. He is horrified to see her change and tries to tell her that this child is not evil at all. It is he who will defeat the devil. But Laura gets out and throws Michael away. Then she stands over him and tells him that the waters are already breaking. Searing jets pour out on the archangel and he screams in pain. Losing his strength, Laura places Michael in her lap and demands that he kneel. He refuses and the woman sinks her fingers into his neck. With the last of his strength, Michael promises that the devil will not be able to control the child. He is the one who will defeat Lucifer because the blood of Christ does not flow and good is always stronger than evil. Enraged, Laura throws Michael aside and begins to destroy everything around her. But then the birth begins. The devil's followers gather in the castle courtyard while Liz takes the born baby away. Laura is thrown down the well and the monster takes a chain with a sharp tip and goes into the courtyard. Liz brings the baby out and shows it to the assembled people. The end of God's tyranny has come. She orders the people to kneel and calls upon Lucifer to receive the baptism of blood. At the same moment, the monster begins to spin his terrible weapon, crushing everyone in the courtyard. At this time, Michael comes to his senses and goes out into the yard as the doctor kisses the baby and dies under the blows. Liz carries the baby away, and Michael finds Laura, who has managed to hold onto the edge of the well, and pulls her out. The pair catch up with Liz's car, and while Laura picks up her baby, Michael calls him the God who chose his mother. He asks the woman to find the cardinal and goes to the well himself. He seals the entrance to the underworld where all the demons of hell have rushed, but the monster rejects him and opens the gates again. And then Michael detonates the explosives he set earlier. The castle explodes to the great joy of the cardinal. A bit later, the cardinal and Laura with the child in her arms come to the temple and return the shroud. And Michael descends into the underworld and frees the people who believed in him. After a while, Liz observes Cardinal and Laura with a grown boy walking through the woods, and she calls the baby Lucifer. And he turns around and shows a dark jet showing out of his nose. Then he turns away. Pretty unusual film which raises the themes of the struggle between good and evil, but viewed through the prism of the scientific achievements of our time. And some doubts arise as to whether man truly understands what he is really doing. A spacecraft is departing from Earth with another group of settlers headed for Mars. One of the passengers convinces her daughter to wave goodbye to the planet as they will be apart for a very long time. The well-established route consists of 2 stages. The shuttle docks with the Aniara, a huge spaceship that has everything for comfortable living. And after 3 weeks, it delivers the passengers to the colonized planet. A young woman named Emily Grant on the ship serves as a Mimarobe, a guide to the world of Mima, the system that allows one to delve into their memories and visions so that the brain does not get bored with the repetitive space scenery. Emily herself loves to remember her walks in the forest, and the visions even allow her to feel her bare feet stepping on the moss. A new neighbor is added to Emily's room, an adult female astronomer. From the huge monitors, the astronomer tells the passengers about the delights of Aniara and that the ship has everything to keep from getting bored: shopping centers, restaurants, and even nightclubs. If desired during the journey, one can work in the water purification department or the seaweed factory, which is necessary for oxygen production. The company pays points which serve as currency for this work. Emily gathers another group for Mima sessions. In the visualization room there is silence as the Mima robe lays people down on the floor face down on a special pillow and launches the system. The glowing screen shimmers with different colors, not showing any pictures. But if the Mima robe needs to know the visions of a specific visitor, she uses a special remote control. Suddenly, an emergency situation occurs on the ship, and the whole group slides to the corner of the room. The passengers exit their cabins in panic to find out what happened. They gather in a large hall where the captain is supposed to make a live broadcast. After gathering his strength, the man makes an announcement. There has been a system failure on the Aniara, and the ship has lost all fuel and drifted off course. The crew believes that it's not a big deal and that by using the gravity of celestial bodies, they will be able to return to Earth. However, the journey will now take a little over 2 years instead of the promised 3 weeks. The outraged passengers disagree with this plan, worrying about their plans without even realizing what lies ahead. Austerity measures are introduced on the ship, but the crew realizes that the supplies will not be enough in any case. At best, there is only enough food for a couple of months. One of the crew members suggests growing algae more actively, which will help them survive. The first 3 weeks of confinement in space pass. The people still don't lose their optimism, but they're already starting to get bored. The Mima becomes the most popular hole as everyone wants to see more than just the infinite universe outside the window, and Emily can't handle it, so she asks the captain for help. In addition, the girl is going through a personal drama, hoping to resume her relationship with one of the crew members, Isabel. Emily asks her neighbor how long it would take to reach the nearest celestial body so that the ship can turn around. The woman initially avoids answering, but then admits that in her opinion all of this is hopeless. There are no points that could help them. The crew just doesn't know how to tell the passengers about it. After hearing this, the Mima robe has a panic attack and runs to her hole to immerse herself in memories of Earth, and also to drink in secret so that the commander would know. That journey has been going on for 3 years already. The people have settled into life on the ship, having come to terms with the length of the flight. Emily goes to a party where she meets Daisy and they decide to alleviate their loneliness together. When the couple retreats to a corridor, Isabel walks by and gives Daisy a cold glance, making it impossible for her to relax. There aren't enough people on the ship to work with the algae and water purification systems. Even young passengers are now being recruited, but the systems can't keep up, and all the drinks have an unpleasant sulfide smell. Strange things also start happening in the ship's hull as the system malfunctions, and Mima, using human language, begs to stop as it can no longer handle passing through people's memories. One of the people lying on the floor starts thrashing around in hysteria, and when Emily connects her remote to him, she sees very unpleasant images in his head. The Mima robe turns to the ship's captain, asking him to let the system rest, but he believes that this is the passenger's only outlet and denies her request. Furthermore, he reprimands the girl for driving customers out of the session. During the next session, Mima repeats its words, and at some point the laser screen begins to crumble, finally stopping the system's operation. The customers are dissatisfied and blame the Mima robe entirely. The people gather at the door to the hall to hold a memorial for Mima, and the management accuses Emily of what happened. They catch the girl and punish her severely, after which they imprison her along with Isabel, who tried to defend her friend before the management. On the ship, a series of nervous breakdowns with fatal consequences begins, and the commander has no choice but to release everyone who is under guard to take up workstations. Dead bodies are sent into open space as the ship is not equipped to store them. Isabel is sent to work in the logistics department, and Emily returns to teaching, this time with the task of educating the children on board, focusing on space sciences that could help them with their return. During their time in confinement, the Mima robe and Isabel developed a relationship, so they move in together once they're free. Communities and groups emerge on the ship, each praying in their own way for a return and rescue. At one of the gatherings of a cult-like group, they invite the girls, as Emily was associated with Mima. In a dark room, the friends first become witnesses and then participants in love games, after which Isabel becomes pregnant. The girl falls into depression, fearing that her indulgence will bring another hostage into the situation, but Emily supports her with all her might. She even plans to make a light screen that would replace the dark picture outside the window with earthly landscapes, but the captain forbids wasting resources on such foolishness. The couple has a healthy boy who grows very quickly, but Isabel can't shake the feeling that she shouldn't have done it. While bathing with his son in the pool, she almost commits a terrible act, but fortunately she's distracted by a message from the captain, who urgently invites his former assistant to a meeting. It becomes revealed that after 6 years of travel, a flying machine has finally been detected, and a meeting with it will take place in about a year. Isabel measures the approximate size of the object and understands that it is unlikely to be a rescue ship, but everyone hopes that they will be able to obtain fuel from it to return to their route. Emily comes to the team to be with her girlfriend at such an important moment. The captain joyfully announces the discovery to the passengers, hoping to boost their morale, which he manages to do. To celebrate the occasion, a party is held on the ship, complete with drinks and leftover delicious food. As usual, the commander tries to present himself in the best light by claiming credit for the team's achievements. Throughout the year, everyone diligently trains to release probes and dock, and by the appointed time, everyone is fully prepared for the operation. The docking operation goes perfectly, and the giant space probe is placed in the ship's cargo hold for examination to determine if it contains any fuel and how radioactive it has become during its time in space. The son of Emily and Isabel is growing up, and the couple now has hope that he will see Earth. Due to a lack of peers, the boy is not developing well and hardly speaks. It is not possible to determine the chemical composition of the object because the study methods on the ship are outdated, but work is constantly being done. The captain declares that he does not consider it a mistake to give people hope, as it has brought stability to many. The roommate of Emily gets drunk at the bar and becomes too candid, causing panic to break out on the ship again. The captain takes notice of this and gets rid of the troublemaker at the first opportunity, even sending her body into open space but allowing for a memorial service for Emily. After taking an exhilarating pill, Emily goes to the bar where she meets Daisy and his friends again. The group has a fun time, but another accident occurs on the ship. An unknown object explodes and damages the equipment. Those who were working on the probe in the cargo hold at the time are lost forever. Upon inspection of the damage, the captain orders them to be disposed of while saving any useful clothing. Meanwhile, the Mimorobe returns home and asks Isabel for forgiveness, and it seems that everything is returning to a peaceful state. However, during the conversation, Emily realizes that her friend has developed mental disorders. After putting her son to bed, Emily shares her achievements at work with Isabel. The two women have a nice chat, and Emily is not worried about anything. Wishing her friend a good night, Emily leaves to finally connect the light screen she has long dreamed of creating. Everything works perfectly, and the remaining passengers on the ship marvel at the earthly landscapes with waterfalls and forests outside the window. As she listens to the words of gratitude, Emily plans to create new pictures. Emily runs to her cabin to hear the opinion of her family. She opens the door with the key, but it doesn't budge. Emily tries to fix the lock several times, but then realizes that something is blocking it from the inside. With effort, she finds a belt from a rope on the door handle, and Isabel is nearby. Coming to her senses a few seconds later, Emily runs to her son's room, but there she's met with a terrible sight. It's the 10th year of the journey. The captain gathers the few remaining passengers in the main hall and presents Emily with an award for creating the light screen. As she receives the medal from the commander, the young woman notices traces of a nervous breakdown on his wrist. Giving a speech, the captain tries to appear heroic in this situation and suggested they should be proud that they have gone farther than anyone has gone before. On the 24th year of the journey, only a few people remain alive. Old and wrinkled Emily leads a meeting of the survivors where they pray for strength to be sent to them. The ship has long been powerless and is floating in space like a piece of space junk. And almost 6 million years later, the spacecraft Aniara approaches an unknown planet in the constellation of Lyra. Mid. 21st century. After conquering the moon, people desired more, and Mars became the new goal. The first ever manned flight to the Red Planet is underway, led by experienced astronaut Alexander Shapaev. Although the flight itself is successful, upon entering Mars's atmosphere, the landing module is hit by a meteor shower, causing it to encounter a sandstorm. Back on Earth, the head of Central Flight Control, Kovalev, orders Shapaev to take manual control of the module, but this fails to rectify the critical situation. Then, Kovalev commands the activation of the return program and the detachment of the small module from the main ship. However, the equipment fails. Shapaev manually detaches the module, saving the main crew. His colleagues can now return to Earth, but this astronaut cannot. Kovalev is deeply affected by the incident, while his interview about the upcoming Mars mission plays on TV, not foreseeing the tragic outcome. Once, Kovalev and Shapaev dreamed of flying to the Red Planet, but Kovalev never imagined his best friend paying with his life for it. Now, as the flight director, he must inform the world of the disaster. Kovalev steps out to address the gathered journalists. Meanwhile, on Mars, it turns out that although the module is severely damaged, the astronaut is alive. Shapaev establishes communication just as Kovalev announces the astronaut's death on television and his heroic act of saving the main ship and crew. Upon learning this, Kovalev rushes to the communication screen, overjoyed to see his friend alive and well. Later, he begins calculating rescue options and asks Minister Rogachev to expedite the next expedition, which could save Shapaev. The minister is horrified by the impending costs. At the same time, a popular TV host reports the Mars disaster to the president of the television corporation, suggesting a show about space dogs instead of a hopeless report on the man stranded on Mars. However, the president advises delving into this topic and calls Kovalev to propose creating a show with his astronaut. A live broadcast from another planet is sensational. Kovalev is outraged by his cynicism as a man is left utterly alone millions of kilometers from his home planet with little hope for rescue. But the corporation president explains that all funds raised will go towards rescuing astronaut Shapaev, showing the world that people do not abandon their own. Kovalev retreats to his office, where photos of his military comrades reveal that he and Shapaev once served in the army together and have been friends since childhood. Looking at Shapaev's photo, the director announces the start of preparations for the rescue mission. Kovalev learns that only one module section remains intact. On Mars, Shapaev activates a robot to explore the area around the module, while Kovalev finds out that the module's power, designed for 30 months, will actually only last 13. The rescue expedition can be launched in 190 days, aligning with the phases of Mars and Earth. Similar developments exist in China and America. If agreements are reached with them, the rescue can be achieved within 13 months. But Shapaev must survive on extreme rationing. The center's psychologist Anna is ready to work with the astronaut as much and whenever needed to help him endure the upcoming year. Meanwhile, on Mars, Shapaev's robot detects an unidentifiable movement outside. Anna contacts the astronaut as it's important to know his psychological state, but Shapaev assures her that everything is fine. After talking with Shapaev, the minister announces that the expedition was a success. Since the module is established on the surface, the astronaut is alive and agrees to participate in the reality show. At Central Flight Control, television crews start their activities. Kovalev's protests are dismissed by the television corporation president, reminding him that this is all for the astronaut's rescue. TV host Grisha advises Shapaev to simply listen to him for the show to succeed. And so, the show begins. The TV host introduces the world to the man cast to the edge of the universe, but Shapaev takes the floor and starts simply talking to people, sharing what he has learned about Mars. He does this with a great sense of humor, winning the love of the Earthlings. However, the man struggles with the loneliness on an alien planet. One day, he contacts Earth because he heard strange sounds, but the communication specialist Peter detects nothing unusual, and Shapaev disconnects. During this time on Earth, the TV host again urges the president of the television corporation to abandon the filming, but he then reveals the true nature of the show. Live observation of a man on the brink of life and death. Shapaev quickly becomes first a Russian and then an international celebrity. He is nicknamed The alien. Videos of his broadcasts about the structure of the universe rapidly gain views on social media, and his live connections draw vast audiences. Children ask their questions, to which the astronaut responds simply and clearly, earning him immense love from viewers. However, some envy the astronaut's fame. Anna's fiancé, Pyotr, starts to feel jealous of Chapayev, with whom she communicates for several hours a day, a fact noted by the TV host. Unexpectedly, the downside of the show becomes apparent. The live broadcasts consume a lot of energy, and Chapayev can only survive under conditions of increased conservation. But the president of the television corp insists on continuing the show, as the more money they earn, the faster they can organize a rescue expedition. Kovalev announces an increase in broadcasts despite Anna's outrage. Meanwhile, on Mars, Chapayev continues to conduct planned experiments and occasionally hears strange sounds, which Pyotr consistently misses. One day, the astronaut begins to suffer from terrible headaches caused by some unknown radiation, but then they suddenly stop, and he hears his mother's voice, which delights him. The next day, he tells young viewers about the universe, space, and Earth. The children listen to him, holding their breath. Suddenly, he confesses that from the very first day on Mars, he felt like he was hearing sounds, as if someone was trying to talk to him, and now he is sure that he is not alone on Mars. This conversation causes alarm at the flight control center. Apparently, Chapayev is starting to hallucinate. The minister demands to find out what is happening with Chapayev. Psychologist Anna requests a private conversation with the astronaut. Chapayev confesses that the sounds he heard seem to express what is inside him, as if he is the cause of everything happening, not the consequence, as if there is no time, no space, not even Mars. It seems that people created this reality and are now trying to understand it. People create universes, planets, harmony, or destroy them, and he feels like he is the cause of everything happening on Mars, and people are the cause of what is happening on Earth. Only on Earth there are many people, and everything is so confused, but on Mars, he is alone. The astronaut is surprised that no one but him hears sounds like a melody, and Anna concludes that these are hallucinations. During the next broadcast, Chapayev suddenly confesses that he feels lost. The TV host has to convince Chapayev that Earthlings are waiting for his return, but suddenly, the astronaut stops talking to Anna. He tries to explain that he encountered something anomalous on Mars, but the flight control center considered him insane. So, Chapayev deemed them insane. Earth was becoming more distant from him. Then, one day, communications specialist Pyotr also catches strange signals. He tries to talk to Anna, but she, upset by the astronaut's behavior and her fiancé's jealousy suspicions, doesn't listen. By the next broadcast, Chapayev does not make contact at the appointed time. Anna tries to call him to talk, but unsuccessfully. Strangely, the president of the television corporation is only pleased by this. He contacts the minister and proposes to discuss the issue of power, as if Chapayev supports Rogachev, he could win the elections and become president. Meanwhile, on Mars, the search robot discovers an unknown, shapeless creature, previously unseen. Back on Earth, Rogachev calls Pyotr and orders him to establish communication with Mars. He has a business proposal that Chapayev cannot refuse. Later, the astronaut goes on air with a rather strange message about life on Mars, showing a toy Martian. Then he agrees to participate in a new show called Chapayev Knows, where he starts giving advice in virtually all spheres of human life. He becomes the most popular person on the planet. Anna realizes that something is wrong, and one day she literally corners her fiancé, demanding he tell her everything he knows, and he confesses that there were indeed some sounds on Mars, but it's impossible to talk to Chapayev because all communication channels are blocked. The astronaut continues to explore Mars with the robot. Meanwhile, on Earth, Kovalev comes to the minister. The money is collected, and it's time to start the rescue expedition. But suddenly, the minister declares that rescue is impossible under any circumstances. Chapayev is a routine loss. The funds raised from the show have disappeared into thin air. The program is winding down, and Kovalev is fired.
Meanwhile, Chapayev continues to experience headaches from the unintelligible sounds emitted by an unknown entity attacking the module. At the same time, Kovalev approaches the president of the television corporation for help, and he asks to wait until tomorrow. The next day, the show starts with Chapayev urging Earthlings to vote for Rogachev, who has nominated himself for president. But at the moment when the minister is bowing before the monitors, a special forces group bursts into the television center. The broadcast is interrupted, and everyone sees that it was not Chapayev, but the TV host addressing the people. It turns out that a duplicate of the module was built in one of the television studios, and a computer model of the astronaut was created. The police began an investigation to identify the client of this monstrous scam, asserting that there was no accident on Mars, and thus, no astronaut. Supposedly, the entire story was invented. For the show, Kovalev is in despair. All hope is fallen. He won't be able to save his friend. Meanwhile, Rogachev is arrested. Kovalev breaks into the flight control center as TV reports the death of Chapayev. Kovalev fights with the special forces. A gunshot is heard. At this time, the president of the television corporation contemplates that Chapayev never existed. Never. But the astronaut does exist. A wounded Kovalev reaches the employees of the flight control center and contacts Chapayev on Mars. He apologizes for Earthlings who are only interested in money and power. Kovalev tells his friend that the government decided to tell the world that there was no module, no landing on Mars, and Chapayev died several months ago on Earth while on duty. It was all fiction for the show, but if he could give people a sign, then the connection is cut off. An emergency news broadcast airs. American satellites recorded an explosion on the surface of Mars in the Cupid's Plateau area. All experts affirmed that it was the module of the International Martian Expedition, which is direct evidence that astronaut Chapayev was indeed on Mars. The astronaut, after the explosion of the module, goes into the deserts of Mars and talks about what the unknown Martian entity told him. Chapayev understood that humans inadvertently are the creators of the material universe. Each moment in time is an act of creation of the universe. Humans are creators who come and simultaneously create this material world to understand it. It's like the double-slit experiment in quantum physics, a well-known experiment confirming the immaterial nature of our universe, where elementary particles become matter only when observed. Humans are the cause of all misfortunes and catastrophes in the universe, just as each person individually is the cause of everything happening in their own life on Earth. Therefore, only humans can change this life, the world, and the entire universe, if they can change themselves. Next, we see how Chapayev voluntarily dissolves and merges with the universe, from which each of us appears in this world.
Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about a science fiction film called Pacific Rim. Be ready for some spoilers ahead. In the deepest part of the ocean, an interdimensional breach opens up, and monsters called kaijus begin coming out from the doorway continuously. Just when the monster is about to attack, Gypsy rises from beneath the waves as well and carries the boat away from danger just in time. The brothers throw furious punches at the kaiju and knocks it down with a powerful slam to the head. The monster rushes towards the Jaeger, but Gypsy grabs onto its head and prepares to use the plasma cannon on the other hand. Crash lands on a beach north of the headquarters and gets rescued by a man with his grandson. 5 years later, the United Nations is abandoning the Jaeger program as the kaijus are destroying the machines faster than humanity can rebuild them. The world leaders decide to invest in building walls around the major cities as a better option against the monsters. Despite the setbacks from the higher-ups, Marshall Stacker refuses to give up on the program that he's supposed to lead. At the same time, Raleigh has given up piloting the Jaegers and survives by working as a builder for the Coastal Wall program. Their efforts are questioned by the workers when they see another wall being destroyed by a kaiju with an Raleigh meets Mako, the Marshall's adopted daughter, who apparently has a very low opinion on the main character. Stacker shows Raleigh the other Jaegers, Crimson Typhoon from China, who's piloted by the triplets known for their thundercloud formations, and Cherno Alpha, one of the most brutal machines from Russia. They also meet the pilots for Eureka Striker, Chuck and his father Hansen, with the amazing record of 11 kills. The Marshal explains that their plan is to install a nuclear weapon on Eureka and carry it to the breach guarded by the other Jaegers. They will detonate the bomb inside the portal in order to close it permanently. The team meets the scientists responsible for their mission. Herman, a physicist, and Newton, a kaiju biologist. Herman explains that the kaijus will appear faster and faster, and they will increase their numbers in the future until humanity is destroyed. He thinks that the increased traffic in the breach will allow it to remain open long enough in order to understand the enemy more. Stacker chooses Herman's plan over Newton's as he needs immediate solutions rather than something that sounds like science fiction. Mako takes the main character to his room, and Roddy inquires about her opinion on his performance. The woman is critical about the main character's decision-making abilities as she thinks that Roddy takes too many risks. He agrees with her while thinking about his brother, but assures her that he tries his best to atone for his mistakes. Mako goes to her room but feels guilty about her bluntness. She turns around only to see the man's chiseled body and gets paralyzed by his male hormones. The next day, Raleigh begins the selection process for the co-pilot, but he defeats every single one of the candidates with ease. He sees Mako's body language showing her criticalness towards his performance and dares the marshal to allow his brightest student inside the ring. They begin fighting each other and their movements become synchronized as they're evenly matched. The Raleigh becomes convinced that Mako is the perfect co-pilot for him. Nonetheless, Stacker refuses to allow her to be in real combat, and everyone walks away in disappointment. At the same time, Newton sets up his lab equipment against the orders from the marshal and begins connecting his mind with the card. Raleigh is surprised to see Mako enter the machine and is happy that he's finally getting a worthy co-pilot. The two begins the drifting process and their memories become interconnected. Stacker gets the news from Herman that Newton had successfully drifted with the kaiju ring and rushes over to see the results. The biologist tells him that the kaijus are actually weapons used by a race of aliens that conquers planets and use up its resources. Stacker wants Newton to do it again, but he requires another brain from the monsters. The marshal gives them the contact for Hannibal Chow. At the same time, Newton manages to find Hannibal in the black market. The man becomes furious when he learned that the doctor drifted with the kaiju's brain. The connection is a two-way street, which means that the aliens now know more about the humans as well, and they'll likely come looking for Newton. Back in the headquarters, they kaijus codenamed Otachi and Leatherback. The marshal tells Cherno Alpha and Crimson Typhoon to engage the monsters while Eureka Striker stays back to defend the harbor. He orders Raleigh and Mako to stay put for this mission. They head towards the ocean and the helicopters drop them in front of the coastline while Eureka Striker follows closely behind. The Crimson Typhoon begins detecting movements around them, and the Kai Alpha gets pushed inside the ocean and the kaiju destroys its pilots by causing it to explode from inside. Eureka Striker grabs the monster and lifts it in the air. The robot throws the kaiju in the water and prepares to finish it by launching its missiles. Leatherback senses the attack and releases a large pulse of EMP that disables the Jaeger and all electronics in the city. With no other choice, Stacker allows Raleigh and Mako on the battlefield as their Jaeger has a nuclear reactor and are not affected by the attack. At the same time, Newton runs away towards the closest shelter as Utachi comes looking for him after he drifted with their kind, destroying buildings and causing chaos in the city. Hans charges towards the Jaeger, but Gypsy manages to maneuver behind and destroy its weapons. This angers the monster, which prompts it to throw them onto shore. Gypsy manages to land without damage and charges towards Leatherback, hitting it with a devastating strike. Place Hansen due to his injuries and pilot the Jaeger personally. Chuck says goodbye to his father as he knows that this mission might be his last. The two remaining Jaegers drop into the ocean and begins heading towards the breach. They maneuver underwater and soon begins to realize that the visibility is extremely poor. As they stop them from making the jump, the two doctors rush into the command room and tells them to stop immediately. They won't be able to go through the breach because they rigged the system by going into the portal with one of the monsters. Before the doubt, this time a category survived the explosion and the people celebrating their victory. The two embrace each other as the military arrives to their rescue. So what do you guys think about this movie? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like my video, please press like and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys next time.
You, sir, are a scholar and a gentleman.
One beautiful day, an ordinary family is celebrating a child's birthday. Dad is grilling barbecue, Mom is chatting with friends, while the kids are amazed by a cowboy's lasso throwing skills. Late 119 years have passed. Lucy is a young woman who possesses many skills and lives in shelter number 33 with her father and brother Norman. Unfortunately, it's impossible to find a man who wouldn't be related to her. Therefore, the council decides to allow her to take a husband from another colony. The happy girl puts on the communal wedding dress, while her neighbors, led by her father, the shelter's warden, prepare tables for the wedding, displayed in a field surrounded by a 3D image of distant mountains. The father is happy for his daughter, regretting that her mother didn't live to see her wedding. Then comes the moment when people head to the portal, guarded by the gatekeeper Chad, Lucy's cousin. He has long hit to the head, then administers first aid to herself and rushes to the armory, where she finds a pistol and hurries to the room where her fellow tribesmen remained. She kills an alien she encounters, but upon leaving the room, she witnesses a real battle. Lucy manages to save Norman when her unmade husband appears, but her father drowns the son-in-law in a barrel of water and rushes to a signal about a breach in the doors. Lucy runs after him and freezes in front of a team of aliens who have taken the shelter's residents hostage. The attacker's leader offers the man a choice: his fellow tribesman or Lucy. As the girl tries to understand what this means, her father locks her in a compartment, after which his captors take him with them from the surface when an explosion destroys the gates. Meanwhile, on the surface of the Earth, in the Brotherhood of Steel barracks, young men are beating one of them, Paladin Maximus. His friend helps the guy recover and leads him to classes where they are seekers and guardians and must be able to distinguish ancient artifacts. At this time, to the Paladin's great admiration, Steel Knights arrive at the base. Later, the friend leads Maximus to a hangar where their armor is stored to look at them. Later, Maximus hears cries of jubilation and finds out that some of them were promoted. Among them is his friend, who will become the assistant to Knight Titus. But in the morning, the barracks are awakened by a wild scream. It turns out that someone put a blade in the future assistant's boot, and the girl severely injured her foot. Maximus is arrested and led to the Brotherhood's leader. In the shelter, order is being restored. Lucy is stitching up her stomach wound, and people gather for a council meeting. She requests that a squad be assembled and sent to the surface to search for her father. However, the council refuses to do this. Lucy then gathers the necessary items sector. At the same time, a band of bounty hunters lures a wild ghoul from the grave to find this scientist heading to the witch Moldover, with whom the ghoul has old ties. Unexpectedly, the ghoul shoots the hunters and sets off on his own accord. Lucy travels across the surface and one day stops to camp near an abandoned house. She makes a fire and falls asleep by it. She awakens to strange sounds and sees a dog devouring a huge insect. A man sitting by her fire explains that the cockroaches not only survived the nuclear blasts, they mutated and are now very dangerous. He advises the girl to return to the shelter as she does not know the rules of the outer world. But Lucy is obliged to find her father. The man leaves. Meanwhile, the Steel Knight and Maximus land in the right sector. Near their landing spot, the fugitive scientist and his dog hide in a cave. Sometime later, the knight and his assistant arrive there. Maximus immediately finds the sought-after scientist's tracks, and the knight heads into the cave. Maximus is also forced to go with him, though he has no armor. Inside, a giant mutant cave bear attacks them. The knight engages in combat, but the beast overpowers him, and Titus suddenly starts to run. Maximus barely manages to kill the huge beast. The knight turns out to be a weak man who blames and insults the boy. Then Maximus refuses to revive the wounded knight and lets him die, deciding to find the fugitive himself. He dons the armor himself and learns to use it. The boy is amazed at how his strength has increased and the boundless opportunities that have opened up before him. Incidentally, he saves a weakling, although it turns out that the person was not very good. He realizes that he needs to figure out who is worthy of protection first. Lucy reaches a town where she was advised to look for traces of her father's kidnappers. She enters one of the shops, where an elderly saleswoman, recognizing her as a shelter resident, advises the girl to leave this place. Shelters are underground havens where the rich hid while the world perished, so no one here will help her. The girl goes outside where the scientist with the dog approaches her again, surprised that she is still here. But then the saleswoman, who turns out to be waiting for him, calls out to him, and suddenly the ghoul appears, who has also come for the scientist. He intends to take him when the saleswoman promises money to anyone who helps protect the scientist. Then the ghoul shoots the scientist in the leg to prevent him from escaping and engages in battle with those who want the reward. The ghoul shoots everyone while Lucy sneaks into the shop, finds the order book, and learns the address of Moldover. She wants to leave, but sees how the ghoul injures the scientist's dog and hears his plea for help. She stands up for him and shoots the ghoul with a capsule, which only makes him laugh. Then a knight lands in front of the ghoul. Maximus asks the girl to look after the scientist while he fights the ghoul. She and the saleswoman take the injured scientist into the shop, where the woman attaches an iron leg to him and offers to accompany him to Moldover, giving her the coordinates. The pair leave while the ghoul fights the knight and quickly finds his weak spot. Maximus has not yet mastered all the advantages of the suit, which costs him losing his navigation ability. The Iron Knight is thrown far from the shop, and at that moment, the ghoul realizes that his target has escaped. Meanwhile, Lucy and the scientist stop to rest, and the girl watches in horror at the scientist's bloodied leg. She realizes they won't make it, and the man confirms this. He confesses that he will soon die, but she must definitely deliver his head to Moldover. He pulls out a saw and dies. Sometime later, the ghoul finds the headless body of the scientist amidst the sandy wasteland and follows the tracks of Lucy, who is carrying the head to Moldover. Soon the girl stops to rest and, after snacking, examines the head, wondering what is so special about it. Just in case, she inserts a tracking device into its nostril. Maximus examines the armor and finds a malfunction. Suddenly, he is called from the base, which surprises him. He reports the death of his assistant and is promised a replacement, though he vehemently opposes this. The boy heads to the nearest town, where he finds a workshop and, paying all the money he has, repairs the broken module. But when he returns to the suit, he discovers a gang of local marauders trying to dismantle the armor for scrap metal. He engages in a fight, but is hit hard in the face. The boy regains consciousness to see that the armor has been breached. He grabs a piece of metal lying nearby and uses it to destroy the attackers. Then he sees a helicopter arriving, dropping off a new assistant. The assistant turns out to be one of his tormentors from the training camp. Maximus manages to close the helmet, and the new assistant does not notice the substitution. Lucy reaches the place where Hollywood once stood. She stops by a pond when an unknown monster attacks her, snatching the backpack with the scientist's head and disappearing into the water. Lucy tries to track the thief but is caught in the ghoul's sights, to whom she explains what happened with the head. At this time, the Shelter Council conducts an investigation into Lucy's escape, after which Norman realizes that no one intends to search for either his father or sister. In the desert, Maximus torments the assistant with various misdeeds, avenging past humiliations, but the latter continues to serve the Steel Knight willingly. They find the ghoul's tracks with a special device, follow them, and find the headless body of the scientist. Meanwhile, the ghoul sets up a hunt for the underwater monster, using the girl as bait. Soon, the beast emerges onto the shore. It grabs Lucy, but the ghoul manages to pull her out. The girl barely manages to fend off the attack, but the underwater monster escapes, taking her boot. The enraged ghoul drags Lucy along. At this time, the Steel Knight's assistant fills the armor with water, talking about his life. Suddenly, Maximus asks him to talk about himself. The boy confesses that in fact he was a decent guy, and they beat him as part of the tradition like any other newbie. Now he regrets that Maximus didn't live to be called up for service. They move on and soon reach the pond. The pair enters the water and immediately sees the monster. Maximus demands the assistant to go ashore and takes on the fight himself, but the boy shoots at the creature and it chases after him. Maximus manages to pull the boy from the monster's jaws, and it dies, spitting out the scientist's head and Lucy's boot in its last act. Then a dog runs up to them, which continues on with them. The ghoul leads Lucy through the wasteland, denying her water, and soon they arrive at the place where a movie studio once stood, where actor Cooper and his wife worked. Soon they reach an abandoned clinic from which male screams can be heard. Entering, they find an old acquaintance of the ghoul, undergoing mutation and suffering because of it. The condition could be alleviated with special medication, but the ghoul doesn't have any, so the ghoul relieves the poor soul from his misery. The girl doesn't understand why he did it, but he explains they need something to eat. The girl mentions that they also had it tough but never ate their own kind. Then the ghoul forces Lucy to cut up the body to take this meat with them. They continue on, although it becomes increasingly difficult for the girl without water. Soon the ghoul stops in front of a structure where radioactive water has accumulated. Lucy can't resist and starts drinking it, earning her companion's approval. She is finally beginning to understand the life of the wasteland. He is her future, and it won't be long now. Then he coughs, and Lucy tries to use this moment to escape, but stops in front of a huge crater, where she gets caught in his lasso. She tries to break free and accidentally bites off the ghoul's finger, for which he cuts off one of her fingers. Soon they reach an old supermarket, where the ghoul offers the woman in exchange for the items he needs. Stunned, Lucy enters the building, not noticing that the ghoul falls into unconsciousness. Inside, she is greeted by a robot. It invites Lucy to follow and implants a new finger for her. Then it pities her and confesses it will just take her organs, and immediately sedates her. Later in the shelter, Norman is delivering food to the aliens captured during an attack, and one of them confesses that the inhabitants of shelter number 32, which they captured before this, were planning something very bad. Norman tries to access the network to find information about shelter number 32, but the data are classified. Together with Chad, they clear the debris and penetrate shelter number 32, where they find a devastated field in the desiccated corpses of the inhabitants. But if they were dead when the aliens arrived, it turns out they killed each other. Lucy wakes up and sees many women locked in glass cabinets, ready to be dissected for organs. The robot prepares to open her chest cavity, but cuts her bonds instead, and she wriggles out from under its saw and disables the robot. Then she fills syringes with drain cleaner, reprograms the robot, and in its company, goes to the owners of the dreadful place. She forces them to release the prisoners, and people flee. But not all. Lucy forces the opening of the last cages. The owners comply, and out come zombies, who immediately tear apart two organ traders. Lucy surveys the battlefield in horror as the last zombie prepares to attack her, but she finds a pistol in her hand. Norman and Chad continue their inspection of the neighboring shelter and learn that its door was open from the outside with a key bearing the name of Norman and Lucy's mother. And Lucy finds medicine to sustain the ghoul's life, and despite the torture she endured, she hands the medication to the ghoul. Maybe she will look like him on the outside, but inside, she will never be like him. The girl leaves, and the ghoul goes into the shattered store and takes the necessary meds to bring himself to a relative semblance of order. Then he stuffs his hat with medicines, but then he notices a video recorder, puts in an old tape where Cooper plays a cowboy, and sits down in front of the television. Maximus and his assistant settle down to rest. Thaddeus cannot contain his delight at being rescued, as knights rarely treat their assistants kindly. He asks to be branded. Maximus obliges and lifts his helmet. However, upon recognizing him, the assistant attacks, resulting in Maximus breaking his leg. But Thaddeus manages to extract a nuclear core from the armor, immobilizing the exoskeleton, and leaves, taking the scientist's head with him. Giant cockroaches immediately attack the immobilized suit. Maximus, terrified, awaits his death when the insects scatter from gunfire, and Lucy approaches the knight. She explains why she needs the scientist's head and helps the man out of the suit, and he gives her medication for radiation sickness. When Lucy recovers, she suggests they go after the head together, since she has a tracker. They will hand it over to the Brotherhood, in return for which the knights will help her find her father. Maximus agrees. At the same time, in Shelter 33, instead of her father, Betty is elected as the warden. Norman dislikes this and studies the history of the shelter. Suddenly, he realizes that all caretakers were selected from the residents of Shelter 31. Lucy and Maximus reach a bridge where they are stopped by a pair of vagrants. They pretend to be scared and ask for permission to pass. The couple, raising their hands, tries to walk away. However, the suspicious Maximus manages to shoot first, saving their lives, though he injures his hand, and Lucy realizes how naive the shelter's residents are. Soon they reach a billboard of the New Californian Republic. The girl is upset because they live with the belief that they are meant to revive America, but it turns out everything has already happened on the surface. Maximus reassures her, as there is no republic anyway. Soon they arrive at a huge crater in the middle of the city. The boy confesses that he survived this hell by hiding in a refrigerator, but then Lucy realizes that Maximus's wound is much more serious and leads him to a building with a clinic sign. Maximus lags behind, and when he enters, the girl is nowhere to be found. He searches for her and enters a chamber between two doors. The space fills with gas, causing the boy to lose consciousness. Betty leads her people to Shelter 32 to announce a partial relocation, as these resources are too valuable. Chad and Norman are surprised to see that the bodies have been removed and all traces of the tragedy have disappeared. Norman inquires about the whereabouts of his mother's key after her death. Betty confesses that they buried the woman with it. Maximus and Lucy come to in the shelter on stretchers. Maximus receives medical care. The shelter leader asks the couple to stay, as the boy needs treatment. Moreover, the suppliers have found armor and will soon deliver it here. Lucy thanks them for the refuge, and the leader informs her that she was born on the surface like many of them. The couple spends several hours in quarantine. From the conversation, it turns out that Maximus never knew a woman's love. Lucy is ready to teach him this art, as it is considered natural in the shelter, but the boy is embarrassed. Moreover, it is not customary among knights. Later, they go to lunch, where they suddenly notice that many of the surrounding people have various physical deformities. The caretaker turns out to be a cyclops. For Lucy, this is strange, but Maximus does not understand her concern. Later, the caretaker confesses to Lucy that they accept people from the surface, which surprises the girl since this was strictly forbidden in her shelter. But when she asks about the forbidden level they were advised not to visit, the caretaker immediately ends the conversation. Maximus finds a room where a nuclear block is installed, powering the entire underground. The leader hands him an electronic key to his personal compartment and suggests he rest a bit. The boy enters, and upon entering, he is amazed to see a basket filled with various delicacies and things he has never seen before. For the first time in his life, he takes a real shower, puts on a robe and slippers, and indulges in unknown products. Meanwhile, Lucy finds a room where the entire history of the Californian Republic is vividly described. It turns out that life here was revived in 2142 but was destroyed in 2277. Lucy is horrified, wondering who needed a new war and why. But then all the shelter inhabitants hear a sound signal and head to the designated place. Meanwhile, a ghoul is caught by the so-called new president of the territory, who owned a supermarket trading in organs, and the ghoul is blamed for its destruction. However, he calmly asks for a needle and thread to sew his finger back on and asks for directions to find Moldover. But the president orders the ghoul to be killed. The ghoul has to destroy the new law enforcers and search for the woman himself. Lucy comes with everyone to a room, in the center of which stands an altar with burning candles. People begin to sing something, moving their hands, and Lucy gradually falls into a trance, supporting the others. Unexpectedly, people start to undress, which shocks Lucy. A bowl goes around, from which everyone takes some powder and smears their faces, and suddenly Lucy realizes with horror that it is the ashes of the deceased. In another bowl there is blood. People call to the Mother of Flame, who must save them, and an image of Moldover unfolds above their heads. A frightened Lucy runs to Maximus and urges him to run away quickly, but the boy has just found himself in such paradisiacal conditions and does not want to leave. So Lucy heads to the forbidden level. She enters a laboratory where apparently some genetic experiments on people were conducted. The girl is horrified as she examines the gruesome exhibits and notices glass cryocapsules containing human bodies. But then the lights turn on and a man in a white coat enters. Lucy hides, but he hears a noise, follows it, and finds the girl. Lucy fights, but the men who arrive seize her and drag her to the upper level. Meanwhile, the ghoul arrives at the digger's house, whose eldest son knows the location of Moldover. The frightened man orders the boy to tell everything he knows, and he admits that the woman can be found at the observatory. But when the ghoul is about to leave, the boy tries to kill him and pays with his life for it. At the same time, the shelter leaders shame Lucy as they had given her refuge, fed her, and healed her friend, but the girl is furious because she has seen what they do to people. Then they show her the complete recording of the attack on the laboratory of the very monster that almost devoured her too. It was the first inhabitants of the shelter who experimented on people, turning them into monsters. They are only trying to alleviate the pain of those who survived. The fact is that each shelter specializes in some experiment, and Lucy just doesn't know this. Nevertheless, she must be punished for her disobedience. The girl is led away, which Maximus sees. Thaddeus makes a stop to rest and realizes that his leg is in very bad condition. A dog bothers him, and he locks it in a metal box, then sets off to find a radio tower to contact the Brotherhood. At this time, the inhabitants of the shelter sentence Lucy to exile to the surface. Moreover, they supply her with a stock of food. The girl is stunned, as this is exactly what she wanted. Nevertheless, in her last words, she asks them to allow her friend to stay. But then Maximus appears in knight's armor, into which he has inserted the nuclear block he just stole. He scatters the men when the girl stops him, as they are letting her go anyway. They go up to the surface, and learning that he stole the nuclear block, Lucy convinces him to return it, as the shelter cannot survive without energy. They drop the block down, and Lucy, moved, calls him a good person. Then he confesses that he allowed a knight to perish and took his armor, so he is not a good person at all, but he really wants to go with her. Thaddeus is caught up by a man who calls himself a doctor and promises to fix his leg. He takes the boy to an abandoned clinic where, in exchange for a nuclear block, he gives him a potion that, when drunk, Thaddeus ecstatically sees his leg heal. Meanwhile, the ghoul finds the locked dog that Thaddeus left behind, and it leads him on Thaddeus's trail. At the same time, the boy reaches the radio station, around which traps are set that tear those who come too close to pieces. Thaddeus sends a signal to the Brotherhood and, waiting for their arrival, chats with the radio station owner about music. Then Maximus and Lucy appear. The girl asks for the scientist's head, the boy accidentally steps on a trap and an arrow pierces his neck. But strangely, he does not think of dying, and then Maximus realizes that he has become a zombie. Thaddeus is upset. He should not have trusted the unfamiliar doctor, but now the path to the Brotherhood is closed for him, as they would kill him immediately. At that moment, copters appear on the horizon. Maximus suggests to Titus to give him the scientist's head and run, and the boy takes this opportunity. Then Maximus gives the head to Lucy and picks up a head of some unfortunate lying nearby, torn apart in a trap. He asks the girl to run, and she kisses him and promises to wait in shelter 33. Some inhabitants of shelter number 33 begin to receive notifications about relocation to the neighboring block. Seizing the opportunity, Norman enters the caretaker system, deceitfully gains access to shelter 31, and heads there. The arriving servants take Maximus and bring him to the camp. The boy hands over the head he obtained to the leader and confesses that his knight perished. After finding nothing in the head, they sentence him to death. And then his friend confesses that she had cut her own leg because she was scared to go searching. Maximus shouts that he knows where to find the real head. The leader orders him to be released, and everyone prepares for a performance. At that time, Lucy reaches the observatory where her father is sitting in a cage. Sitting at the table, Moldaver greets the girl, who is horrified to see a dried-up, yet still living mummy seated next to the hostess. The girl is willing to give her the head in exchange for freedom. Moldaver extracts a vial from the head and offers to listen to the real story of her father. Although he begs his daughter not to listen, the woman begins her story. Meanwhile, Norman finds a robot with a human brain in the secret shelter 31, which immediately tries to inject him with something. The boy barely dodges the crazy machine. Moldaver's story transports Lucy to the distant pre-war years when actor Cooper, agitated by his wife's talks of an impending nuclear war, decides to follow her. He comes to her work and listens to a corporate council meeting through a bug he planted on his wife. Billionaires discuss the decline in sales worldwide. Then they move on to the topic of shelters. Someone does not understand their necessity, arguing that if anyone survives on the surface, those emerging from the shelters will simply be killed. They counter that one could live underground for centuries, as there are vast reserves. Time is their main weapon. One could simply outlive the rest. A debate erupts among the corporate leaders, interrupted by Cooper's wife. She thinks primarily of her daughter and wants to secure the best future for her. In the future, Norman reaches a room where rows of cryo capsules stand with the names of those who slept in them, including all the wardens, his father among them. The action returns to the past, where Cooper's wife reveals that over 100 shelters have been built across America, so each of them could fulfill their wildest dreams. In the future, the robot explains to Norman that all these people were selected for their creative thinking and positivity. They are the country's best gene pool, destined to revive the nation after the surface is cleansed. In the past, the debate flares up again, as destroying so many people is not easy. Then Cooper's wife suggests to start the war themselves. A nuclear war is a tragedy, but also the greatest opportunity to start anew, because then there will be no one left to fight. They will become monopolists of the entire world. At this point, Cooper is distracted by a young man who would like to get an autograph, and this is Lucy's young father. In the present, Moldaver explains that the man has lived for a very long time. He is part of the corporation that orchestrated all this horror, but he never spoke about it to his wife. She was very smart. It was she who discovered that something was draining water from the shelter. She realized that civilization had returned, but her husband mocked her. Then the woman took the children and fled. They found a wonderful city, but her father came with his men and burned it down. Lucy brought Moldaver the cold fusion she developed and stolen by corporations, infinite energy with which life can be revived. Lucy sees a pendant on the mummy's neck that belonged to her mother and realizes what happened to her. Her father begs her not to believe Moldaver, but the girl demands that he give her the synthesis code. He relents and provides the numbers. The woman leaves for the laboratory to start the cold fusion process. Meanwhile, the robot informs Norman that it will not let him leave after what he has learned. At the same time, Lucy's father pleads with her to open the cage and return home, just as an alarm sounds and Brotherhood copters appear over the observatory, opening fire on the people below. Knights and their assistants descend to the ground and engage in battle with the observatory's defenders. Maximus rushes forward, searching for Lucy, while the knights wreak havoc around. Soon the knights burst inside the building, where they are suddenly stopped by a ghoul. It turns out he too once wore armor and knows their vulnerabilities. Thus he easily shoots the Iron Knights, remaining unharmed himself. At this time Lucy cries, torn between her father's pleas to come home and the terrible situation of her mother. But then at the room's threshold, a wounded knight falls, followed by Maximus. He opens the cage and rushes to Lucy. However, the girl confesses that it was her father who destroyed his wonderful city. Her father meanwhile dons armor and throws Maximus aside, knocking him unconscious. The girl pulls out a gun, but then the ghoul enters the room. When he learned Lucy's surname, he couldn't believe that this was the same guy from the corporation. He had waited over 200 years to find out where his family was. Lucy's father activates jet engines and flees. However, it turns out that this was exactly what the ghoul needed, as the man leaves a trail that can easily be followed to the place where the world's rulers are hiding, those who orchestrated the nuclear war. He urges Lucy to come with him. Then Lucy shoots the mummy, says goodbye to the unresponsive Maximus, and follows the ghoul. At the same time, an injured Moldaver returns to the room where Maximus regains consciousness. She has activated the nuclear synthesis, and now people have infinite energy. A stunned Maximus watches as surviving lanterns light up over the ruins of the city, while Moldaver smiles and dies. The Brotherhood members who rush in think their comrade killed the woman and celebrate Maximus as a future knight. Meanwhile, the ghoul and Lucy follow the trail of her father, who heads through the desert to a distant city. The series ends there.